Welcome to the fantasy audiobook, Marvel's Humanoid Magic Weapon. Chapter 41. Just now, when Fang Tien threw Spider-Man into the sky, he used a laser beam to directly interrupt the agent's steering wheel and burn a hole in his front clothes. As long as he advances a little bit, the agent will probably burp. No wonder he was breaking out in a cold sweat. He was under great pressure to monitor such a dangerous person. After experiencing the edge of death, this agent was a little confused. Should he continue with this mission? Ignoring the confused agent, Fang Tien actually just wanted to scare him. If he wanted to avoid the spy's eyes, it was actually very simple. He only needed a spatial shift to disappear in front of them. Anyway, he's not doing anything important right now. If S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to see it, let them see it. The experience in school is nothing to talk about. Fang Tien also doesn't have the temperament to study hard, and he spends most of the class time napping. The only thing worth mentioning is probably that Parker had his head shaved by Fang Tien without knowing it, and entered the campus with half of his hair black and half of his hair bare. Seeing other people's strange looks, he felt a little strange. What's going on? So many people in the school turned to look at him today. When did he become so popular in school? Has his identity been exposed? As Parker walked, he was still thinking about it in his mind. It wasn't until I entered the classroom that a familiar student finally couldn't help but ask. "You two have very eye-catching hairstyles today." Parker laughed and said, "Yes, Fang Tien's hairstyle is very eye-catching, and it makes the whole classroom bright." As soon as these words came out, all the students in the classroom looked at each other strangely. How come they hadn't noticed before that Peter Parker was still a funny guy? He has a yin and yang head, but he dared to laugh at other people's hairstyles. What if Fang Tien's hairstyle was just if you're eye-catching, your hairstyle is simply blinding? Being looked at by everyone, Parker finally felt something was wrong. Recalling what the classmate said just now, the two of us. What hairstyle do we both have? Muttered to himself again, while slowly extending his hand to his head. Fang Tien, I must kill you. Fang Tien quickly dodged Parker's attack and hid on the other side. Parker, think about it, do you want to go to class with your current hairstyle, or do you want to have a bald head like me? Spider-Man heard this and was stunned for a moment before he had a choice. Compared with yin and yang heads, bald heads are indeed more normal. After thinking about this section, Parker's expression changed. Fang, are we good friends? Fang Tien Dama Jin Dao sat down and said, "Of course, we are indeed friends. If you are a friend, do you want to help your brother? Have you thought about it?" Fang Tien raised the corners of his mouth. "This is the bald head you begged me to shave for you. I didn't ruin your hair." Spider-Man's mouth twitched and he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes, this is what I'm begging you to do. Class is about to start. Please help me." Fang Tien laughed proudly. He found a deserted corner, a red light flashed, and Peter turned into a bright bald head. He touched his head sadly, comforting himself in his heart. This is good, it matches Spider-Man's tights better." Seeing that there was another bald head in the world, Fang Tien felt even happier and couldn't help humming a song. I smile proudly, and smile proudly again, smiling to see that people in this world are not old. Parker followed behind. Ben's eye was looking at Fang Tien, looking for flaws, simulating in his mind how to make him suffer a big loss. As I thought about it, the more I thought about it, the more irritated I became. The monster in front of him was incredibly strong. The last time I fought with him, I tried my best and he was unharmed. However, the two parties can still interact with each other. At least in terms of physical sensitivity, he is far superior to him. Now, when Fang Tien reached out to grab him in the morning, he felt that there was no way to avoid him and no way to hide. Before he could even react, he grabbed his neck and carried him up to a height of 100 meters. Even high in the air, I had time to shave my yin and yang head, but I didn't notice it. Doesn't this mean that if Fang Tien wants to kill him, he doesn't even have the strength to resist? This situation really makes people feel more and more desperate the more they think about it. Thinking of Fang Tien's strength, which pushed him farther and farther behind, Parker looked a little depressed. Hearing Fang Tien humming a song in front of him, Parker cheered up a little. "What song are you humming? Why can't I understand?" It turned out that Fang Tien unknowingly hummed a song in Chinese. This was not a shameful thing. Fang Tien told the truth directly. Chinese songs, of course you can't understand them. When did you learn Chinese? We have known each other for so long, but I have never heard you speak Chinese. To be honest, although Fang Tien received the memories of his predecessor when he just traveled through time, those memories were not his personal experiences after all. Many things seemed to be separated by a layer of membrane. Unless he deliberately recalled them, they would not emerge. Come up. After listening to Spider-Man's words, Fang Tien recalled it carefully. After recalling it, he confirmed that he was originally Asian and could not speak Chinese. It seems that he has even forgotten his ancestors. Being replaced by Earth's Fang Tien was also unlucky for him. Recalling it in his heart, Fang Tien didn't show it at all on his face. There are many things you don't know about me. For example, I am a Kryptonian, did you know? What? Parker was startled. Kryptonian? Superman from the comics? Are you kidding? Spider-Man's voice became lower and lower the more he spoke, and in the end he was a little unsure. Thinking of the power Fang Tien showed, how similar it was to Superman. In the past, it was just a body of steel that looked a little like Superman. Later, he could even fly. Well, today, he even has heat vision. Parker felt that God had played a big joke on him. Could it be that now he really met the aliens in the comics? Carefully savoring Fang Tien's ability, he suddenly remembered something is wrong. When you fight the transformed lizard professor, it seems like there is also a fire ability. This doesn't mean superhuman ability. What's more, Superman is a white man. Fang Tien laughed angrily. Do you really think I am Superman in the comics? A living Superman is standing in front of you, and you still believe in comics? He began to talk nonsense seriously. Actually, the original destination of my spaceship was China. Unexpectedly, it encountered a small meteorite on the way. The spacecraft fell off the track and crashed into the United States. That's why I ended up in the United States and became an orphan. Parker was doubtful, always feeling that something was wrong. When he arrived in the classroom, he felt uncomfortable and restless in his seat. After class, he finally couldn't help but approached Gwen and said mysteriously, Fang Tianyu, he didn't tell you, where is he from? Gwen was a little confused. I don't need him to tell me, I know he is from New York. Parker became anxious. No. He told me he was a Kryptonian. Coming from the same planet as Superman. Grid couldn't help laughing. You don't believe it, do you? You believe what he said. Parker, but except for the ability to control fire, his other abilities are similar to Superman. Gwen thought for a while and said with some uncertainty, in other words, because Fang Tien's abilities are similar to Superman in the comics, you think he is a Kryptonian. On the other hand, because Fang Tien's abilities are different from Superman's, the abilities in the comics are denied. The whole thing seems to be asking you to prove 1 + 1 = 2. But you proved it like this, because 2 = 1 + 1, so 1 + 1 = 2. I have never heard of people proving it this way. Parker thought about it for a moment. I felt a little annoyed and slapped my head violently. Fake, was fooled by him again. In fact, with Parker and Fang Tien's familiarity, he should have been able to find many flaws. However, if a person believes in one thing, he will look for evidence consistent with the matter from all aspects. Instead, he will intentionally or unintentionally ignore those flaws. This is also a cognitive bias that everyone often has. It wasn't until someone woke me up that I suddenly realized why I had been so stupid before. There was obviously something wrong with Honda in this matter, but he tried his best to find other evidence to cover up these flaws and lie to himself. The same is true for Parker. After he was awakened by Gwen, he remembered a lot of things that were wrong. The biggest flaw is, Fang Tien was often bullied in the past and would always be beaten to a bloody head. If he is a Kryptonian, even if he has not awakened other superpowers, at least he will not be injured by ordinary people's fists. Besides, sometimes Fang Tien gets sick, but I haven't heard of Superman getting sick on Earth. After confirming that Fang Tien was deceiving him, Parker didn't know whether he was disappointed or relieved. You know, his idol when he was a child was Superman. If that guy Fang Tien is really Superman, the idol will be disillusioned. In fact, Parker didn't know that his original guess was already half correct. Although Fang Tien is not a Kryptonian, he can still be regarded as an alien visitor. There is nothing wrong with saying they are aliens from another universe. Just when Parker was suspicious, Fang Tien was watching a news item on his mobile phone. Osborne Enterprises has made new moves. In order to boost the falling stock price, Osborne Enterprises decided to launch a new business that is safe and clean green energy, biopower generation technology. Watching the news, the spokesperson of Osborne Enterprises talked endlessly about the various advantages of this biopower generation technology. It's safe, pollution-free, and low-priced. Fang Tien's mind is not on this aspect, and he doesn't care about biopower generation technology. He was just thinking, Electro. When will it appear? I'm really looking forward to it. To be honest, in the previous life on Earth, Spider-Man's movies had been overturned and recreated, and Fang Tien was not sure which ones would happen and which ones would not. What's more, this Marvel Cinematic Universe is integrated with the X-Men. The X-Men timeline is a mess, and no one knows what's going on. After the news about Osborne Enterprises, there is another news. This news aroused great concern from Fang Tien. Because this is about Stark Industries, the Stark Industries of Iron Man. In the news, a spokesperson for Stark Industries is speaking. Our company's top product, the Freedom Series, has a new member, the Jericho missile. The Jericho missile has excellent performance and combines the rapid counterattack technology developed by Stark Industries. We believe that Jericho missiles will bring us huge orders. As soon as this news comes out, Stark Industries' stock price will definitely rise again, but these are not things that Fang Tien cares about. What he is concerned about is a word, Jericho missile, mentioned in the news. Isn't this missile the weapon that Tony Stark showed to the military at the beginning of the previous Iron Man movie? In other words, the birth of Iron Man is not too far away. Fang Tien recalled it carefully and finally remembered a piece of useful information. Iron Man went to Afghanistan the next day after missing an appointment at the Apex Award ceremony held by the Department of Defense. In other words, as long as you know the time of the Apex Award, you can be sure that Tony Stark was attacked. It's time. Fang Tien had to get involved no matter what. Turn on your computer and type, Department of Defense, Capstone Awards, and, Award Time, into Google. Press the search button lightly, and information will appear immediately. It turns out that the time is just a week later. 1 week is enough. Now that I have seen this matter, let me take control of the whole thing. Fang Tien was lost in thought, and Parker came up. Having been fooled by Fang Tien, Parker naturally wanted to seek justice from him, but as soon as he came over, he was also attracted by the news. Fang Tien noticed Parker with a look on his face. He couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong, Parker? What are your thoughts on Stark Industries?" Spider-Man sighed. "Do you still remember the scene when we fought Professor Lizard?" "I'm not Alzheimer's, so of course I remember, but what does this have to do with Stark Industries?" Parker ignored Fang Tien's disgusted expression. "We split up at that time. I went to prepare the antidote, and you fought Professor Lizard. When I arrived at the laboratory in the Osborne building, I found that all the experimental instruments were missing and the laboratory was completely blank." At this point, Spider-Man showed a puzzled expression. "I don't know what the situation is. Things were so chaotic at that time, Osborne Enterprises probably didn't have time to move the experimental equipment." Fang Tien laughed secretly in his heart. In order to delay time, he simply swallowed the laboratory instruments. Now it seems that this move was the right one. Otherwise, Parker will soon be able to find the antidote. After preparing it, how will he play? Parker naturally didn't know what Fang Tien was thinking. After being puzzled, he continued, "The matter was urgent. I left the Osborne building before I had time to explain it to you. Later, I went to find Stark Enterprises, and the medicine was prepared in their laboratory. Speaking of which, Tony Stark, the chairman of Stark Enterprises, was punched by me." Hearing that the future Iron Man was beaten by Spider-Man, Fang Tien suddenly became interested and asked Parker for the details. It turned out that Tony Stark was also in the laboratory at the time, and Spider-Man forced his way into the Stark Tower. Later, I met him in the laboratory. Tony was very interested in Spider-Man. After listening to Parker's explanation, he asked the security personnel to retreat. Originally, when things got here, there should be a perfect ending. The bad thing is Tony's mouth. During the process of preparing the potion, future Iron Man chattered, asked questions, and mocked Spider-Man's aesthetics many times. He even touched Parker's body, looking very interested in him. If that's all, it would just make Parker a little upset. Who knows, Tony is trying to kill himself. While chattering, he tries to sneak attack Spider-Man and pull off his hood. How can Spider-Man's spider sense be easy? Even if he was upset, but he reacted in time. Reflexively, he swayed and ducked, and also gave Tony a panda eye. What kind of strength does Spider-Man have? After receiving this blow, Tony Stark immediately threw himself on the street and fell to the ground without moving. Only then did Spider-Man's ears calm down. Knowing this, Fang Tien laughed evilly. Iron Man, your dark history is waiting for you to create after you wear the iron suit and declare yourself to be Iron Man in public. How do you face this scene? Parker looked at the smile on Fang Tien's mouth and shuddered. He even gave up the thought of asking him to accuse him. Fang Tien came back to his senses and asked Parker, by the way, what do you want from me? Parker shook his head repeatedly. It's okay, I just want to see what you are looking at, you are so absorbed in it. Wanting to find Fang Tien. As for Tien's trouble, let's wait until when we can beat him. But, do I still have this chance? Spider-Man thought sadly. Parker didn't want to elaborate, and Fang Tien didn't ask further questions. Now that he wants to intervene in Afghanistan, there are two things that need to be resolved first. The first thing is to drop out of school. This is a small problem and can be easily solved. The second thing is Gwen's self-protection. Fang Tien also has an idea about this matter. He had long thought about dropping out of school. School was boring, and he had no intention of studying or making a living based on the knowledge he learned in school. Staying on a campus like this is just a waste of time. With this in mind, Fang Tien only said hello to Gwen and Parker and walked to the prefect's office. Parker and Gwen were worried and followed him to see if there was any chance to persuade Fang Tien. In fact, they also knew that with Fang Tien's ability, he wouldn't learn anything in school, but they suddenly heard that he was going to drop out of school, and subconsciously wanted to persuade him. Arriving outside the prefect's office, Fang Tien knocked on the door. Soon, a voice came from inside, "Please come in." The prefect was a middle-aged man, somewhat stout and bald. He was sitting at his desk, looking at some documents. Fang Tien and 3 other people came in, and he didn't even raise his head. 3 classmates, what's the matter? Fang Tien said, "Mr. Prefect, due to personal reasons, I hope to drop out of school." The prefect finally raised his head and put down his head. Holding the document in his hand, he looked impatient. "This classmate, don't think about dropping out of school because of trivial matters. Why don't you young people have any endurance?" Fang Tien had a look of surprise on his face. How could this prefect follow suit? Like gunpowder. Gwen couldn't help but interject. "You concluded that we don't have any endurance before we even explained the reason. On what basis did you make this judgment?" The prefect waved his hand and said disapprovingly, "You kids, I don't know yet. If something trivial happens at random, you think the sky is going to fall, and you make a fuss and want to drop out of school. In fact, what kind of damage can dropping out cause to the school?" Looking at this prefect, he looked arrogant. Fang Tien's heart gradually became angry. Just as he was about to speak, the prefect made another move. He took out a form, slapped it, and said, "Forget it, you don't need to explain. Just take it, fill it out yourself, have your guardian sign it, and give it to me again. I will report it to the school." "Yes." Fang Tien held his words in his mouth, feeling extremely stuffy. But he just wanted to drop out of school today. Seeing that his goal was about to be achieved, he was thinking about it and didn't bother to argue with this arrogant prefect. Fang Tien took the form. Most of the information to be filled in was some basic information, as well as reasons for dropping out of school. 10 minutes later, the form was filled out. Throwing the completed form in front of the prefect, he turned around and left. "My guardian is me, you can do whatever you want." Ordinary students, in front of him, who would not be submissive. Being treated so casually by Fang Tien, the prefect opened his mouth to reprimand him. Suddenly, he seemed to see something extraordinary. Like lightning, he took out the form and looked at it carefully one by one. After reading it, the prefect broke out in a cold sweat. Wait. Fang Tien turned around in confusion. Prefect. What else is there? The prefect wiped the cold sweat on his head first. Your name is Fang Tien. Fang Tien, an Asian. Fang Tien said strangely. That's right, this school is for Asians, also called Fang Tien. I should be the only one. What's the problem? Is it necessary to discriminate against Asians in dropping out of school? Origin. When Fang Tien thought of this, his expression became a little stern. The prefect saw that Fang Tien looked wrong and apologized quickly. While apologizing, he bowed a few times. I'm sorry, Mr. Fang, I didn't recognize you. Sir, please sit down and have tea, he said and quickly pulled him over. The chair asked Fang Tien to sit down and took out tea leaves to make tea for him. Fang Tien was puzzled by the arrogant and respectful attitude of several Zhongs. Prefect, why are you so polite all of a sudden? Besides, I'm not Japanese, so you don't have to bow to me. In China, if you want to show your sincerity, you should at least kneel down. The prefect was a little embarrassed. Ah, really, I'm sorry, Mr. Fang. Fang Tien was also a little angry by the prefect's previous attitude, so he took the tea made by the prefect and put it on the table. It seems that you have no sincerity. As he spoke, he casually took out the pistol that existed in the space and slapped it on the desk. Looking at the pistol on the desk, which was visible to the naked eye, the prefect's face immediately turned pale, and he regretted it so much that he almost wanted to wipe his face. Slap him into a pig's head. How come I didn't recognize him? He is indeed a dangerous person. Even when he comes to class, he always carries a pistol with him. Regretful in his heart, the prefect looked hesitant. Gritting his teeth for the last time, he knelt down with a tense body. I'm sorry, Mr. Fang, I was blind. I hope Mr. Fang can forgive me. As he said that, he kowtowed a few times. In order to save his life, he really exerted all his strength to eat. The floor made a loud bang and there was blood on his forehead. Looking at the prefect's actions, Fang Tien felt a little emotional. Ordinary people are still more afraid of firearms than other things. Because of the power of firearms, they understand that they are powerful, but they cannot understand it. Fang Tien felt a lot more relieved after feeling angry. Okay, get up, I forgive you. Now, can we talk about dropping out of school? The prefect breathed a sigh of relief and said, Mr. Fang, it's your business. I can't make the decision. Why don't you wait a moment, sir, while I ask the principal for instructions? Fang Tien said he was okay. When the prefect walked out to make a phone call, Parker and Gwen looked at him with strange eyes. What, do you have some other identity that we don't know about? Like Tony Stark's secret illegitimate child or something? Fang Tien was dumbfounded. What are you thinking? How is it possible? Even if I have a relationship with Stark, I will only be his father. Gwen said. Then why, after the prefect knew your name and information, he seemed frightened and apologized constantly, as if the sky would fall if he offended you? Fang Tien showed a solemn look on his face. This is a secret. Listen carefully. In fact, I also have another identity, and that is Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. They were afraid of me, maybe because they noticed my secret identity. As he spoke, he said to himself seriously, how could my identity be leaked? Is there a spy in the bureau? This time, Gwen and Parker said in unison, nonsense. Do you think we are mentally retarded? Actually, Fang Tien also felt very strange about the attitude of the prefect. He was thinking in his heart, before the prefect was clearly arrogant, why did his attitude change immediately when he saw his information? Everything happened in a few seconds. Fang Tien scanned the office for a week, and finally focused on the document that the prefect had read before coming in. He walked over and opened it and saw that it was his student status information. On this document, Fang Tien, the photo was clearly in front of him. Looking at this situation, he had a guess in his mind. Could it be that S.H.I.E.L.D. had intervened? What he and Gwen said just now were naturally nonsense. It was the same as Fang Tien thought, but this S.H.I.E.L.D. was indeed involved in this matter. After two major incidents, S.H.I.E.L.D. also knew that he was not a good person. S.H.I.E.L.D. was afraid that someone in the school would annoy Fang Tien with his short-sightedness. What if it really happened? Someone pissed him off, and with his temper, it was not impossible to go on a killing spree. In order to prevent this from happening, Shield specifically notified the board of directors of Zhongcheng High School, asking them to pay special attention to Fang Tien and never let people provoke him. In order to illustrate the seriousness of the situation, Shield even used the adjective, extremely dangerous. Although the board of directors did not know who Fang Tien was, he could make Shield value him so much. But they were just a school, and naturally they would not provoke someone who even a secret service agency like Shield had to treat with caution. Therefore, a meeting was immediately held. The principal, vice principal, as well as all prefects and directors, all attended the meeting. At the meeting, the chairman repeatedly emphasized that every teacher in the school must know Fang Tien. He is an extremely dangerous person. He must not be provoked, and other students must not be provoked. Throughout the meeting, there was only one topic. Not long after the meeting was dismissed, the prefect returned to the office with a piece of information for each person. Like the members of the board of directors, after the meeting, he also believed that Fang Tien was a dangerous person who should not be messed with. Unexpectedly, not long after the meeting ended, the evil star came to his office and asked to drop out of school. Because Fang Tien's hair was shiny at this time, the prefect did not recognize him for a while. This led to his arrogant attitude. Gong. In the end, for the sake of his own life, he even knelt down and apologized. Although Fang Tien didn't know the specific situation, it didn't stop him from guessing the truth of the matter. In a flash, more than 10 minutes passed, and the students from Zhongcheng High School the principal hurried over. The principal was also a member of the board of directors, and he knew the truth of the matter. Because he knew the truth of the matter, he was even more anxious. How could it be that Shield could specifically inform the person that it considered an extremely dangerous person? What can they afford? Before they even got close, the principal said eagerly, "Classmate Fang Tien, have you been treated unfairly? Please tell me and I will severely punish the person who provokes you." Fang Tien was helpless. He just wanted to drop out of school. Why was it so troublesome? He repeated what he had said to the prefect. After hearing this, the principal breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, for someone like Fang Tien who might bring big trouble to the school, the principal would like to make him disappear immediately. But things can't be done like this. Fang Tien said it well, but who knows what he is thinking in his heart. Maybe the school would be destroyed just after he dropped out. The principal couldn't help but shudder at the thought of what might happen. The principal's thoughts turned around and he had an idea. "Well, classmate Fang Tien, you don't have to drop out of school. I give you the right. From today on, you can come to class if you want to. If you don't want to come, you don't have to come. You don't have to worry about exams, okay?" After hearing what the principal said, Fang Tien was also a little surprised. How did Shield scare the school? Make them so afraid of him? He was surprised, but everything seemed normal on his face. Of course, Fang Tien would not refuse such a good thing. It also saved him from having to go through complicated procedures. He nodded and agreed immediately. Seeing Fang Tien nod, the principal finally relaxed. As long as the young man was satisfied, anything could be said. After the matter was done, Fang Tien had no intention of trying to ask him. The chatting principal said nothing and stood up to leave. When he walked out of the office door, Parker's eyes were red with envy. You know, because he often goes out at night, he is always late in school. He doesn't know how many times he has been beaten for this. Scolding. Parker didn't dare to drop out of school. If he thought about dropping out, Aunt May might break his legs. He asked with red eyes, "How did you do it?" Fang Tien started to sneer at this time. "Want to know? Come here and I'll tell you secretly." Spider-Man stretched out his head secretly, and Fang Tien whispered in his ear, "This is a secret, you must not tell others." Parker was confused. Then what? Fang Tien, we already said it was a secret. How could it happen? Looking at Parker provocatively, with a mean look on his face, as if to say, "Are you very unhappy? If you are unhappy, come and hit me." Parker endured it again and again, and finally did not take action. Because he knew that even if it was a move, and he was not Fang Tien's opponent, maybe he would toss him again. Seeing Parker clenching his fists and enduring it, Fang Tien was a little disappointed. That's the bad thing about becoming friends, you can't be unscrupulous. The provocation is asking for a beating. These days, it's hard to even ask for a beating. Parker doesn't know what Fang Tien is thinking, otherwise, he would have to yell, "If you want a beating, just say so. Do you know that I have wanted to beat you for a long time?" Now that he has the right not to go to class, Fang Tien doesn't want to stay in school anymore. After saying goodbye to the two of them, he turned around and walked towards the school gate, leaving only Parker there. Envy, jealousy and hatred. There was no need to go to school. For a moment, Fang Tien really didn't expect anything to do. After only staying at home for a few hours, he became a little quiet and thoughtful. Just in time, before he left before going to Afghanistan, there was one more thing to do. That was to give Gwen some self-protection power. In this matter, he wanted to refine a magic weapon for Gwen to defend himself. Before that, he had thought about it. When others were refining the body of a magic weapon, they got some information from the Book of Chaos that was one with his soul. This information let him know that it was not feasible to transform other people into a body of magic weapon. To be honest, after knowing this, Fang Tien breathed a sigh of relief. If this idea was really feasible, he didn't know what to do. He didn't want another person in the world who had the same skills as him. Maybe some people may think that he is selfish. Fang Tien never denies this. Except for himself and his relatives and friends, he really never cares about other people. In fact, Fang Tien does not know that it is precisely because he gave up. I don't know how much trouble this idea will save me in the future. As the saying goes, there are 3,000 avenues, and all of them can achieve enlightenment. Similarly, only one person can reach the top of an avenue. The current situation Tien, the soul and the Chaos Book are integrated, and they can be regarded as occupying a great road. If someone takes the same path, there may be some disputes in the future. Although Fang Tien, who owns the Chaos Book, has countless times greater opportunities than others, but there may still be some troubles. As for now, because he has given up this idea, such troubles will naturally not occur. Although he cannot transform others into magic bodies, but while receiving the information from the Chaos Book, he can also understand, after possessing the Samadhi True Fire, the idea of refining weapons is feasible. The most basic one is the Spirit Gathering Array, passed down from the book, and it is also the only one passed down. This Spirit Gathering Array is not so much a gathering place. Spirit is better said to be energy gathering. It can gather all kinds of energy in the space. In the world of Shenxia, it is naturally spiritual energy. In other worlds, it will be other energies. Without this formation, the method refined by Fang Tien, only he can use the weapon, so why should he practice hard? If he has this time, he might as well train his body more. In addition to the Spirit Gathering Array, Fang Tien can only think about other formations in the magic weapon. The way is to get it yourself. The good thing is that he doesn't need to personally create each formation from the very basics. As long as Fang Tien has encountered it personally, he will naturally understand what kind of formation can exert similar abilities. For example, he once drank the lizard potion. When he was upgrading, under the influence of the lizard potion, he had the opportunity to develop the ability to recover quickly, but he wanted this ability to be useless, so he had no choice. Now he can carve this ability into a formation and put it into the magic weapon. If there are suitable materials, sufficient energy supply, and this restorative formation, after the magic weapon is successfully refined, it will even allow the owner of the magic weapon to have a recovery ability similar to that of Professor Lizard. This kind of recovery power is at the level of rebirth of a broken limb. You can imagine how powerful it is. However, it is difficult for a clever woman to make a meal without rice. Without suitable materials, Fang Tien could not refine this magical weapon. There are a lot of materials, which are specialties of the Shenxia world. They are naturally not available in this universe. Fortunately, Samadhi True Fire has another ability besides smelting various materials. That's what distills the essence of this material. For example, ordinary steel can only be used as a material for basic mortal weapons. A large amount of steel can be used to extract second-level materials, which are materials that can be used to make magic weapons. A large amount of second-level materials can be refined into a small amount of third-level magic weapon-level materials. This is also the reason why Fang Tien can advance by simply refining a large amount of ordinary materials. In other words, if Fang Tien is patient, it is possible to extract materials that can be used to refine immortal weapons from hundreds of thousands or millions of tons of ordinary steel. However, the more times it is refined, the more effort it takes and the higher the level of cultivation required. Defensive magic weapons are difficult to refine, and Fang Tien does not have any formations in this regard for the time being. Only when he first advanced, because he withstood too many attacks, the ability that his body automatically produced to increase his defense was available. However, it is still unclear how much protection this ability can bring to ordinary people. Therefore, he planned to refine an offensive magic weapon this time. In this regard, there is a lot more room for choice. If you want to refine a weapon, you must at least have the materials. Now that Fang Tien didn't have a hair in his hand, he naturally went out to buy some materials first. Suddenly, it was obviously not that easy to obtain any precious materials. Fortunately, he didn't plan to train any magical weapon this time, or even something at the level of a magic weapon. He just wanted to train a magic weapon. As for the materials, you just need to use a lot of steel and refine it yourself. After leaving the door, Fang Tien walked towards the steel market. Before taking a few steps, he first noticed an Audi in the distance. Why does the driver of this Audi look so familiar? He knew that it was someone from S.H.I.E.L.D., so he was not polite and stretched out his hand to wave the car over. After getting in the car, Fang Tien casually exchanged greetings. Why, I broke the steering wheel of your car last time, and now you have another car. The driver was stunned when he heard this, and cursed in his heart. It turned out that this person was the agent that Fang Tien had frightened when he shaved Spider-Man's head. After that incident, the agent applied to Coercing for evacuation because Fang Tien might have recognized him. In the end, Coercing did not agree. He said this at the time. Since Fang Tien has recognized you, and you are still alive, doesn't it mean that this task is suitable for you? The agent listened to Coercing's statement was rejected in his heart, but the official level would kill people, so he was still performing this task. After listening to Fang Tien's words, he simply broke the pot and said, yes, this car is equipped by the Bureau. If you have any orders, sir, please tell me directly and I will definitely complete it. For such a sensible person, Fang Tien was very satisfied and nodded. Very good, you can be my full-time driver from now on. The agent nodded with a grimace. Okay, sir. After a while, he couldn't help but asked, sir, what kind of benefits do you get from being your full-time driver? Fang Tien looked shocked. Isn't it the best treatment for you to be my driver? Aren't you supposed to be my driver? The fool was so shocked that he burst into tears of gratitude, knelt down and kowtowed, and offered his loyalty. Seeing Fang Tien's shocked expression and listening to his shameless words, veins popped up in the unknown agent's hands, and he almost wanted to break the hand he was holding. The steering wheel was pulled out of the car and hit him hard in the face. However, thinking about the huge disparity in strength between the two sides, he finally became discouraged. He said expressionlessly, yes, it is indeed an honor for me to serve you. It is my fault to raise the treatment issue with you. Fang Tien waved his hand. If you know your mistakes, correct them. You are still a good comrade. I forgive you. Steel market, let's go. The unknown agent drove on the road. Fang Tien thought happily, it seems that being paid attention to by S.H.I.E.L.D. is not without benefits. At least now, you can have a free driver whenever you go out. Arriving at the steel market, Fang Tien purchased 2 tons of steel. He estimated that for this magical weapon, he was going to make one that was small, exquisite and easy to carry. After refining these 2 tons of steel, it would probably be enough. In the resentful eyes of the unknown agent, Fang Tien ignored it and forcibly removed all the back seats of the Audi and threw them into the garbage. The car loaded with 2 tons of steel staggered onto the road. After arriving home, he unloaded the steel from the car and walked in without even giving the unknown agent a sip of water. Behind him, the unknown agent looked at the unrecognizable car and wanted to cry without tears. I wonder if the Bureau will reimburse me this time. Fang Tien at home always feels like something is missing when looking at the 2 tons of steel in front of him. Suddenly, he patted his head. Wasn't there something missing? The ability he currently has, the most suitable for attacking is the laser beam. Since laser light is used, red quartz is also indispensable. Pure red quartz can also be called red crystal. This kind of thing shouldn't be hard to get. Even if it's not pure enough, won't it become pure after being refined by the true fire of samadhi? When I went out again, the agent was gone. What troubled him was, where could such a thing be sold? In the blink of an eye, he thought of Mr. Zhang from Nico Hardware Store. Mr. Zhang has lived around here for decades. If you ask him, he should know. After making up his mind, Fang Tien walked towards Mr. Yang's store. In the Nico Hardware Store, Mr. Zhang always seems to be so leisurely. There was not a single customer in his store, but Fang Tien had never seen him anxious about this. As soon as Fang Tien entered the door, Mr. Yang's eyes immediately brightened up, and he walked around him, admiring him while looking at him, and even stretched out his hand to try to squeeze him, which shocked Fang Tien. "Uncle Zhang, what are you doing?" The old man shook his head and said nothing. "Why did you come to me?" Fang Tien explained his purpose. After listening to his words, Mr. Zhang said directly, "If you want this, you don't need to find anyone else. I have it here. Come with me." As he said that, he led him to the backyard. There was a small room in the backyard. The door was covered with dust. It looked like it hadn't been opened for a long time. Mr. Zhang took out the key and was about to open the door. Who knew, even the keyhole was rusty and couldn't be inserted in. Fang Tien saw this. "Uncle Zhang, let me come." Mr. Zhang sighed. "No need, I haven't entered this room for a long time. I used to put anything interesting in this room when I saw it. But then I lost interest and the place became deserted." As he spoke, he exerted force on his hands, and the entire door was ripped off the door frame, causing a burst of dust. After seeing this scene, Fang Tien was a little amazed. This Uncle Zhang, who used to be so inconspicuous, turned out to be really does he have a unique skill. It seems that he was not lying when he wanted to teach me martial arts last time. After thinking about it, the two of them entered the house. They saw that the floor of the house was filled with various things. Most of them were unknown ores, and some other things. But Fang Tien didn't recognize them all. The red quartz ore was also among them. It looked very pure, and the red color seemed to be dripping. Fang Tien was a little strange. "Uncle Zhang, you collect these things, what is the use?" Mr. Yang's mood was waning, and he waved his hand. "Get your things and leave quickly." Seeing that he didn't want to answer, Fang Tien didn't ask further. This is other people's privacy. Since he didn't want to answer, forget it. Now he is still waiting to refine the first magic weapon before leaving for Afghanistan. There was not much time to waste. He picked up the ruby stone ore and left the shop. The old man said he would not charge for it, but Fang Tien could not resist him, so he had to thank him and get up and go home. If you want to refine a weapon, the first step is of course it as a smelting material. At home, Fang Tien's mind moved slightly, and with a cry, a group of three-color flames appeared out of thin air in midair. It was the true fire of samadhi. Ordinary steel cannot withstand the engraving of the formation. Refining it into a mortal weapon is of no use. Therefore, the purchased steel must be refined. 2 tons of steel on the ground are put into the suspended samadhi true fire little by little. The steel just touches the flame and immediately turns red. It stood up, and after a few seconds, it completely melted into red molten iron, rolling in the air. After all the steel melted, there was only a ball of red liquid about 1 foot in the sky. There was more black on the ground, of powder. This is because Fang Tien has already begun to refine these materials while smelting them, so there is only such a small amount left. At this time, the refining of materials has not been completed, and the liquid mass in the sky is still there, continued to shrink slowly. Let the samadhi true fire slowly refine the steel. Fang Tien put the ruberite ore that Mr. Zhang got from him into another flame and refined it at the same time. The quality of this ore is not low, at least in his induction. The difficulty of refining is much higher than that of steel. Fortunately, Fang Tien was already at the level of a magic weapon at this time. In addition, after upgrading to a magic weapon, he refined a lot of things. After several battles, his cultivation level improved again. In addition, the materials extracted now are only at the magic weapon level, so it won't take long. Otherwise, if you look at the time for refining weapons and magic weapons in myths and legends, isn't it 99 and 81 days, or even 99 and 81 years? After only 2 hours, he had refined a large mass of materials. However, he looked at the two liquid masses, one red and one silver, in the sky and smiled bitterly. Originally, he was planning to refine a pistol, and based on the structure of the pistol stored in his space, he molded it into one piece so that it could shoot ordinary bullets as well as laser beams. Gwen grew up in a police family, and presumably she had practiced shooting, so she happened to be able to use a pistol to protect herself. Unexpectedly, he still underestimated the consumption caused by refining the materials. After refining 2 tons of steel, only a small lump is left, probably only a dozen grams. In addition, the density of the refined material is greater than that of ordinary steel. It is impossible to even think about making a pistol. Fang Tien had an idea and decided not to make a pistol at all. My thinking was limited before. Since it was a weapon refining, wouldn't all the shapes be the same? If it is a pistol, it cannot be stored in the body as a magical weapon, and it is not easy to carry it with you. With such a small amount of material, I might as well refine it into a ring. As long as the functionality is not compromised, it is more convenient than a pistol. Just do it if you think of it. As Fang Tien's thoughts flowed, the silver liquid in the sky automatically flowed and deformed, finally forming a shining silver ring. The liquid of ruby also deforms automatically and solidifies into a gem with dozens of facets. Under the light, as the gem rotates, it reflects the bright light. The ring and the gem came close to each other, and 4 pairs of small hands automatically grew out of the silver ring, hugging the gem tightly. The two are integrated and inseparable. At this time, this magic weapon is half finished. At this time, although the ring looks shiny, it actually has no function other than being extremely strong and capable of being thrown out and hitting people. If you want it to produce various magical effects, you still have to look at the formation that will be carved next. The first thing to depict is the Spirit Gathering Array. Huang Zongyuan carved the Spirit Gathering Array into the gemstone. This gemstone is not big in size after being refined, but its quality is really good. Fang Tien stacked the small Spirit Gathering Array 3 times before it reached its limit. For things like formations, naturally the better the materials are arranged, the larger the scale, and the more layers are stacked, the better the effect will be. Needless to say, the material used to carve the formation this time can only be the gem itself. It is an unexpected surprise that it can be stacked 3 layers. The Spirit Gathering Array is used to provide energy, and the laser array used to attack is naturally used. This laser array is simplified from Fang Tien's own laser light ability. Its power is limited and cannot be compared with his own. Moreover, as his cultivation level increases, the power of his own abilities will continue to increase, and there is no limit. The power that the refined magic weapon can exert is fixed from the beginning, and the two are completely different. Following Fang Tien's thoughts, the laser array was carved into the body of the ring. The laser array requires higher material endurance than the Spirit Gathering Array. Therefore, just 1 layer is carved and there is no way to superimpose it. After the formation is completed, the next step is to connect the 2 formations. Powered by the Spirit Gathering Array, the laser array emits laser beams to attack. This step was very simple, and Fang Tien completed it quickly. At this point, the first magic weapon he refined has been successful. He took off the ring that was still steaming in the sky and played with it. Fang Tien was quite satisfied with his gratitude. This magic weapon was made by him, and he can use it naturally. Even if the magic weapon owner recognizes someone else as the master in the future, the 2 people's authority will be the same. There is no magic weapon that he refined and can be used by others to attack him. Oolong. The ring body plus the gems weighs about 20 grams. However, this can still be regarded as a magic weapon. After recognizing the person as the master, it will only feel integrated with itself in the owner's hands, and will not feel like it has fallen out of the hand. The next step is to test the function of this magic weapon and see how it compares with the expected effect. The space inside the body spreads, and after using several spatial movements, Fang Tien has arrived in a small forest. There are big trees all around, the leaves rustle with the breeze, and the sky is filled with stars. He listened carefully, and within a radius of 1 kilometer, except for the chirping of various insects, there was no human movement. Here it is. Pinch the ring with 2 fingers and aim forward. Let's try the minimum power first. Before he finished speaking, a small red light flashed away. Fang Tien looked closer. There was a small hole on the trunk of the big tree in front of him, about 4 or 5 centimeters deep. This power is probably the same as that of an ordinary small power police officer. It's almost the same with a pistol. As long as it doesn't hit the vital point, most humans will be injured without dying. Don't think that this is the greatest power of this magical weapon. If he wasted so much effort and could only produce something that was as powerful as a police pistol, Fang Tien might as well find a piece of tofu and hit his head on it to death. As mentioned before, there are 4 pairs on the ring body, that is, 8 small hands. The function of these small hands is not only to grasp gems, but most importantly, they can adjust the output power of laser light. There are 8 roots in total, which means that when 8 roots are output together, the power is the strongest. Similarly, because there are 3 layers of spirit gathering arrays superimposed in the gem. Only when these 3 levels of spirit gathering array are fully opened and the 8 tentacles are outputted together can it be the most powerful. In other words, the most powerful power of this laser ring is a full 24 times that of the previous attack. When it is at its maximum power, it is easy to break a tall tree from the waist. It can be said that ordinary people will die if they are rubbed or touched. It is useless to hide behind the wall. After seeing the effect caused by the minimum power, Fang Tien was quite satisfied. But besides that, he had other experiments to do. Still pointing the ring forward, 1/3 of the power. The 8 tentacles on the ring lit up at the same time, and a thicker red light shot out. There was a crisp sound, and the leaves fluttered down. The trunk of a big tree had been completely penetrated, leaving a round hole of about 10 centimeters. Surprisingly, what was penetrated was not the big tree directly in front of the ring, but the big tree on the left side in front. Fang Tien was a little surprised. It really works. It turned out that this was a sudden idea that Fang Tien had during the refining process. The more powerful the laser beam is, wouldn't it be in vain if it can't hit anyone? Since there are 3 spirit gathering arrays superimposed on the gem, wouldn't it be possible to have one of the spirit gathering arrays provide energy to the laser array and the other 2 spirit gathering arrays to control the direction so that the laser can be stimulated from unexpected angles? This was just a whim of his, and he wasn't sure he could do it successfully. Now it seems that this idea is successful. In addition to the front, laser rays can be emitted from dozens of facets on the gemstone. As long as the owner of the magical weapon focuses on where it is, he can shoot the laser beam there. This can be considered semi-automated. Even people who know nothing about shooting can use this laser ring to attack the enemy. The only drawback is that the most powerful attack can only be fired from the front. Because when shooting to the side, 2 other spirit gathering arrays are needed to control the direction. Moreover, this ring cannot shoot infinitely. If it is the most powerful attack, it can only be launched about 3 times at most, and then you have to wait for the spirit gathering array to gather energy. For attacks with low power, since each spirit gathering array has time to recover in turn, it is not a problem to attack 80 or 90 times in a short period of time. Of course, if the initiating owner provides the energy, there will be no such shortcoming. For example, if this magic weapon is used by Fang Tien himself, it can be said that you can shoot wherever you want without hesitation. However, Fang Tien himself can emit more powerful laser light, so what's the use of this thing? All the expected functions were realized. It can be said that this weapon refining operation was a perfect success. Next, naturally, he handed the results to Gwen, and then Fang Tien set off to Afghanistan without any worries. Thinking about it, she is an ordinary person, and there is no powerful person who is deliberately trying to deal with her. With this laser ring, her safety should be ensured. Fang Tien was about to leave for Gwen's house when he suddenly thought of a question. Now that Samadhi True Fire has developed new abilities, and the supporting space power, it should be able to develop more applications. Logically speaking, his space transfer is formed by using the space inside the body to project to the outside world. No matter how many things are stored in the space inside his body, he has a clear view. He can even clearly sense every corner of the space. So, if he could project this feeling, wouldn't it mean that he had a wide range of sensing abilities? Fang Tien also became excited when he thought of this idea. In the past, in addition to distance restrictions, his spatial transfer could only be transferred to places where his eyes could see. If this idea can be realized, it will not only be equivalent to having a wide range of sensing capabilities, but also spatial transfer will become more practical without blind spots. Just as he was on his way now, Fang Tien started experimenting on the spot. He closed his eyes and carefully sensed the space inside his body. In the space, there were some clothes, various bullets used as snacks, and a pistol. These all appeared clearly in his mind. He could even tell how many fibers were in the clothes and how many bullets were in the box. Fang Tien calmed down and stopped paying attention to things in the space. His attention spread with the projection of the space. In fact, this matter is not difficult, but Fang Tien never thought that it could be used in this way. Once this layer of window paper was pierced, with just a little effort, he mastered the method of using the space in his body to sense the surrounding environment in less than 10 minutes. With his eyes closed, Fang Tien laughed silently, feeling the movement of wind and grass around him, the chirping of birds and the chirping of insects. Suddenly, the figure in the forest blurred and appeared thousands of meters away in an instant. Along the way, he teleports everywhere as he pleases. He always happens to appear in a corner where no one is paying attention. He is much more relaxed and comfortable than before. Fang Tien called this newly developed ability spatial sensing, easy to understand. In the past, if he wanted to avoid other people's eyes and ears, he had to activate his 5 senses and watch the people around him with concentration. At the same time, he had to pay attention to the heartbeat and breathing to prevent someone from standing in the blind spot of his sight. As for now, the space sensing ability is activated, and everything is vividly visible. The two abilities of spatial sensing and spatial transfer work perfectly together. That's right, these two abilities are based on the same foundation, and it is normal for them to work well together. At this time, Gwen, a top student, was reading in the room. Quietly, a figure appeared behind her. Looking at Gwen, who was still reading, Fang Tien's eyes lit up. Looking at the beauty under the lamp, the more I look at it, the more energetic I become. Under the dim light, Gwen was holding a book and reading, concentrating on it, turning the pages of the book from time to time with 10 green fingers. She didn't know what she saw, and a slight smile appeared on her pink face. This smile seemed not to come from the human world, but from the fairy world. Fang Tien was fascinated at first sight. Like a sneak attack, he kissed her gently on the face. Gwen, who was attentive, was startled and dropped the books in her hands. Fang Tien fished it out casually, grabbed the fallen book and put it on the table. What are you looking at, so fascinated? Gwen saw it was Fang Tien and breathed a sigh of relief. When did you come? Standing behind me, I didn't even notice. Fang Tien chuckled and said, I just came in, you are so beautiful, I can't help it. Gwen was slightly shy. What are you talking about? Since you are here, just sit down. I only have drinks, do you want some? Fang Tien shook his head. Forget it, I came to see you today because of business. Gwen asked with concern, what's the matter? Fang Tien, I have to go abroad for something recently, and it may take a long time. Seeing the way Gwen hesitated to speak, Fang Tien knew what she was thinking. Don't worry, you also know my abilities, I will be fine. Gwen said, is it because of this that you want to drop out of school? This may be part of the reason. Fang Tien organized his speech. As you know, I have no interest in learning, and I can't learn anything in school either. I just had something to deal with, so I decided to drop out of school. I just didn't expect that the principal would let me get my diploma without going to class. There is no need to mention this matter again. I am coming to find you and have another thing to give you. With that said, Fang Tien took out a small wooden box from his pocket. Open it and take a look, it's for you. Gwen took the box over. When she opened it, it turned out to be a ring, shining brightly under the light. She seemed to have been electrocuted, and the box fell onto the table. This is too fast and too sudden. Gwen was incoherent. Of course, I don't mean to reject you. Looking at Fang Tien's expression, she suddenly changed her words. No, I didn't agree either. I mean, neither of us have graduated yet, so it's too early. As he said that, he wanted to push the ring back. Fang Tien saw that Gwen had misunderstood, so he didn't explain anything. Anyway, in his heart, Gwen had long been his woman, and no one except himself wanted to touch her. Therefore, He took Gwen's hand. Gwen wanted to retract her hand, but she seemed to be hesitant and did not use much strength. He picked up the ring and put it on the middle finger of Gwen's left hand. From now on, you will be considered mine. Gwen only felt a pain in the belly of her finger, as if she had been pricked by something, and couldn't help but scream. She retracted her hand and tried to take off the ring on her middle finger. Unexpectedly, the ring looked loose, and when she put it on her finger, it seemed it was like it had taken root and couldn't be removed. She was a little anxious. What's going on? My finger seems to be pricked. Why can't I take off the ring? Actually, at that moment, Fang Tien controlled the laser ring, took some of Gwen's blood, and recognized the owner. After recognizing the owner, no one else except Gwen and Fang Tien could use the ring. The laser ring is a magical weapon. Although it cannot be integrated into the body, it still has the function of automatically adjusting the body shape. Naturally, it fits tightly on the finger and cannot be taken off. Seeing that Gwen was a little anxious, Fang Tien comforted him. Don't worry, it's okay, this ring not only does it look good, it also has other functions. It also automatically resizes to fit your finger so you can't take it off. But usually you won't feel burdened. Gwen struggled for a long time and finally gave up. She said angrily, "What kind of strange ring did you give me? Even if you put it on, you can't take it off." Fang Tien chuckled. "Since you've followed me, why take off the ring? It just lets others know that you already have a boyfriend, so as to prevent others from harassing you." Gwen was still a little worried. "Others, if you don't tell me, how can I explain it if my father sees it?" Fang Tien disagreed. "How else can I explain it? Just tell him that I am my boyfriend. If he is angry, tell him to come and cause trouble for me. I will let him know. Let him hit you and never fight back." A picture appeared in Gwen's mind. His father was angry with smoke coming from his head, and he drew his gun and fired. However, Fang Tien did not dodge, and was doing his own thing, from time to time. He also picked up the bullet and threw it on the ground. That scene is funny just thinking about it. Fang Tien didn't know that this scene had appeared in Gwen's mind, and was still explaining. "Besides, I told you before, this ring is not an ordinary ring, it has other functions. Feel it carefully, you can feel it too. I'm going to Afghanistan and leaving this ring behind just to protect you." Gwen heard this and looked carefully at the ring on his hand. For some reason, the more she looked at it, the more intimate she felt about this ring. As if it was originally one with itself. The ring itself also looks good. Although the original material was just ordinary red quartz stone, after Fang Tien's refining, the gemstone is now extremely pure and crystal clear. Dozens of facets on the gem reflect reddish light under the light. Even the silver ring seemed to have air currents flowing around it. The more she looked at it, the stronger her affinity for the ring became. Suddenly, as if a boundary had been broken, she vaguely sensed the name and function of the ring. This kind of supernatural incident should have shocked Gwen, but now, she feels that it is natural. This ring is called a laser ring. Can it emit laser light for self-defense? Fang Tien smiled and nodded. In fact, the information Gwen sensed was specially left behind when he was refining this magical weapon. It also contains methods to control the power of the laser ring. These methods are all related to thoughts. It's hard to express in words. It's more accurate to leave information directly in the magic weapon. After knowing the function of the ring, Gwen was a little eager to try it. In the past, she always believed in science. Since meeting Fang Tien and Spider-Man, her scientific concepts have been broken time and time again. Now, her ability to accept is already very strong. Even if this kind of magical weapon that allows ordinary people to launch powerful attacks appears, she will accept it easily. Fang Tien saw it from Gwen's expression. You knew what she was thinking. How similar was Gwen at this moment to a child who had just gotten a new toy? He picked up Gwen and said, "Let's go for a ride outside." As he spoke, he flew out of the window. Gwen let out a short scream and wrapped her arms around Fang Tien's waist. Fang Tien quickly rose into the air, and soon reached an altitude of several hundred meters. He slowed down and the sky flies slowly. At night, New York is brightly lit. Roads, like jade belts, surround the entire New York. On the jade belts, countless flashing fireflies stop and go, moving forward slowly. Only in the high sky, the feeling is completely different from that of sitting on an airplane. On the airplane, you are surrounded by a surrounding iron sheet, and you can only observe the bottom through the small glass window. But now, standing hundreds of meters in the air, it seems that the entire world is covered by trampled underfoot. How many people can see this scene? After Gwen's violently beating heart calmed down, she couldn't help but praise, "It's so beautiful." Fang Tien approached Gwen's ear and said, "You are so beautiful. I was fascinated by you when I first saw you." The two started kissing high in the air. After calming down their breathing, Fang Tien said, "Okay, you'd better try the laser ring first, so as not to panic when you need to use it later." Looking around, I happened to see the Stark Tower not far away. Fang Tien got a bad taste. He was going to see Tony Stark in a few days. Today, let's consider it a meeting gift for him. Pointed out looking at the Stark Tower sign in the distance. Just aim for that and give it a try. Gwen was a little worried. Isn't this bad? What's wrong? That's it. Unable to defeat Fang Tien, Gwen pointed the ring in the direction of Stark Tower. At this time, Stark Tower was not the headquarters of the Avengers. The logo was still Stark, rather than the later famous word sign. No need to practice. A few red lights flashed, and 4 of the 5 letters 1,000 meters away burst together, flickering for a while and then dimming. Only the word A is still shining alone. Fang Tien smiled with satisfaction. "Iron Man, this is my first gift to you. I hope you like it." This was the first time Gwen did something blatantly bad, and his heart was beating fast. Urging, "Let's go quickly." Thief Fang Tien laughed. "Why are you in such a hurry to go back? Why don't we do something else while we have this time?" As he spoke, the spatial sensor opened up, blew up all the surveillance cameras, and flew towards Stark Tower. On the top floor of Stark Tower is Iron Man's luxurious office. Stomping his foot, a big hole was opened from the roof of the building. Fang Tien hugged Gwen and got in together. In crime scene, Gwen was uneasy, but Fang Tien was as relaxed and content as if he had returned to his own home. He found red wine from the wine cabinet and found 2 wine glasses, placing them in front of Gwen and himself. The red wine flowed out, slowly poured into 2 wine glasses, like liquid rubies. The surface of the wine rippled gently, exuding a faint aroma of wine. Fang Tien introduced Bordeaux wine produced from Le Mondo Winery. It is said to have a rich and wonderful fruity aroma and a long aftertaste, which is just right for us to try today. Gwen said uneasily, "Isn't this bad?" Fang Tien picked up the wine glass. "What's wrong? Don't worry, Tony Stark won't care about this. Besides, he will get to know me very well in the future." Fang Tien is right. In the future, Iron Man will indeed be very familiar with him, so familiar that he can even give him a steel armor. But this is all for the future. Looking at the big hole in the ceiling, Gwen also made up her mind. Now that it's time, let's taste the red wine that she has never drunk before. Let's talk about other things later. There is wine today and you will be drunk tomorrow, right? As the saying goes, wine is not intoxicating. People are intoxicated, but flowers are not intoxicating. Everyone is intoxicated by themselves. Alone and alone, the 2 of them quickly became drunk. That night, the night was enchanting. The next day, Tony Stark was in a very bad mood. Last night, when no one was around, some evil person took down the sign on his beloved building. You know, he designed this sign himself. He always believed that the citizens of New York could look up to his design. It's a sign of enjoyment. When he entered his office, his lungs almost exploded. Not to mention there was a big hole in the ceiling, and the room was also in a mess. His collection of fine wine bottles were thrown all over the floor. That was all. This little thief even left 2 sentences on the wall. I don't know how they were engraved on it. 3 minutes into the wall. Tony shithead, I'm very pleased with your hospitality. 5-star praise. P.S. By the way, I'll put some juice in the wine cabinet next time, thank you. A loud roar came from the office. I'll kill you, little thief. Everyone in the whole building is trembling with fear. They don't dare to take a breath, for fear that the boss will take out his anger on him. Of course, Fang Tien, who has left long ago, doesn't know about these things. Even if he knows, it will at most make him happy for a while. That's all, don't even think about asking him to correct it. After Fang Tien and Gwen arrived home, they first saw Gwen's father, Sheriff George, sitting in Gwen's room with a livid face. It seemed that he had been sleepless. Only then did Fang Tien remember that when he took off with Gwen in his arms, Gwen screamed. It was probably at that time that Sheriff George was alarmed. Things were almost as he thought. The two of them flew away later. When Sheriff George heard Gwen scream, he immediately rushed over and forced the door open. However, the room was already empty. Looking at the fluttering curtains, Sheriff George, who calmed down, suddenly thinking of Fang Tien. He was really worried about his daughter, so he waited in the room. Unexpectedly, the wait lasted all night. When Fang Tien came back with his daughter in his arms, his face was naturally livid. "Boy, I'll kill you." Fang Tien was not angry either. "Uncle, of course you can kill me. I just don't know, do you want to kill me in 10 minutes, or in 1 hour? Please do whatever you want, I will never fight back." Chief George was choked by Fang Tien's words. He didn't know how to answer. Why didn't the man in front of him act according to common sense? When a son-in-law meets his father-in-law, he should do everything possible to please him. How can there be anyone like him? Fang Tien was obviously a piece of shit. Sheriff George wanted to kill him but couldn't think of a way to deal with him. With Gwen's persuasion, he had no choice but to borrow the donkey from Poxia and walked out of the room stiffly. Gwen was solved. Fang Tien had no worries about the matter. A whole day had passed. There were only 6 days before Iron Man went to Afghanistan. It was time for him to set off. Although he ate people the night before, he would go on a long trip the next day. It seems a bit unreasonable. But couldn't you help yourself last night? There was nothing you could do about it. Fang Tien had his own thoughts about what happened to Iron Man in Afghanistan. Of course, he didn't rush over to kill Iron Man. Rescued. He didn't believe that with Tony Stark's temperament, he would be grateful to him for saving his life. Didn't you see the Dr. Ethan who was imprisoned with him by the terrorists? He saved Iron Man's 2 lives. First, he performed surgery on Iron Man, saving his life, and later he took a bullet for him when the 2 escaped. Chapter 51. Is this kindness big enough? After Iron Man escaped, he forgot about him in the blink of an eye. What did he do for Ethan again? Iron Man may not be said to be ungrateful, but Fang Tien doesn't believe that he can repay every drop of kindness with a spring. Fang Tien will use his own methods to get what he wants this time. After saying goodbye to Gwen, Fang Tien set off for Afghanistan. Fang Tien didn't want S.H.I.E.L.D. to find out about this operation, so he naturally wouldn't take a plane, but would use space transfer to get on his way. The straight line distance from Afghanistan to the United States is tens of thousands of kilometers. If you take a plane, including the transfer time, it will take at least 20 or 30 hours. Space transfer is different. With one flicker, Fang Tien can move more than 1,000 meters. In 1 second, he can advance 3 to 4,000 meters. This speed is more than 10 times faster than ordinary passenger planes. Of course, with the level of his current magic weapon, it is not enough to support him to perform space transfer tens of thousands of times continuously. Every time he walks 1 or 2,000 kilometers, he also needs to take a short rest. Don't underestimate these 2,000 kilometers. You must know that Fang Tien can only move more than 1,000 meters at a time. In other words, he can perform 1,000 space shifts continuously. No matter how you look at it, even in battle, it's impossible to perform space transfers thousands of times in succession. And as long as there is time in between, Fang Tien can use it again after taking a short rest. It can be said that the battery life of this level is already very abnormal. Even though he needed to rest in the middle, he still reached his destination 4 or 5 hours later. Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world. This place is plagued by constant wars, various local armed forces, and terrorists emerging one after another. On the streets, armed men with guns can be seen walking around everywhere. No wonder Stark Industries and the US military would choose this kind of place to display weapons. Only in places like this would all kinds of advanced weapons be more needed. The place where Fang Tien is located is Kabul, the largest city in Afghanistan. After arriving in Afghanistan, the first thing to solve is the language problem. There are many languages spoken here, and communication will be very difficult for locals who do not live there all year round. But this is not a problem. If you have money, why can't you still find a translator? Before Fang Tien came over, he stored a large amount of US dollars in the space to prepare for this. Wandering on the street, most of the people walking on the street were men. Even if there were women walking by, they were in a hurry, and their bodies were wrapped tightly. Not long after walking on the street, someone came over and said in broken English, "Sir, do you speak English? Do you need a guide?" He was really dozing off, so someone gave him a pillow, and Fang Tien nodded. He said, "Just in time, I really need a guide, please come with me." The man was overjoyed when he saw that Fang Tien didn't even ask for the price, and thought that he had found a fat sheep. "Where are you from, sir?" "New York." "Sir, are you here to travel? Do you want me to recommend some scenic spots?" Fang Tien really hadn't thought about this. He thought for a moment and said mysteriously, "Where can you buy white powder here?" As he spoke, he made a sucking gesture. The guide knew clearly that he seemed to be a drug addict. But the person who paid himself was God, and it was not like he had never seen such a person before. They were dealing in firearms and drugs here, has always been very rampant. The two called a car and drove towards a deserted street. Fang Tien did not ask for directions and let him lead him forward, as if he was very relieved. No matter how small Afghanistan is, it is still a country. Fang Tien was unfamiliar with the place, and for a while, it was really not that easy to find some anti-government armed forces or terrorists. So, he simply came up with a fishing method. "I think these drug dealers should be able to cooperate with those local armed forces. There must be contact. Even if there is no contact, you can find these small drug dealers, follow the clues, and find some big drug lords, and you can make do with it." We soon arrived at the place. Fang Tien got out of the car with his bag. He came in a generous manner. He opened the zipper, took out one and handed it to the driver. Both the guide and the taxi driver's eyes lit up. Could it be that all the bulging packages contained US dollars? Thinking of this, both of them breathed a little heavy. The guide took Fang Tien walked towards a small door. There were 2 armed security guards inside the door. Fang Tien felt bright after seeing it. It seemed that he had found the right place. The 2 people did not intercept the guide. It seemed that he was a regular customer here. After entering the door, Fang Tien and it was like a second world outside. It was extremely lively inside, with dazzling lights flashing constantly and deafening sounds that made it impossible to hear anything else. Soon, the guide pulled a dark and thin little man over. This man he probably didn't speak English, so the guide translated, "Sir, this is the person you were looking for, he has good stuff." At this time, the man had handed over a small bag of white powder, indicating that Fang Tien had inspected the goods first. Fang Tien took it, picked out a handful, and pretended to take a sip. He squinted his eyes, seemed to taste it, and finally shook his head, pretending to be dissatisfied. "The quality of these products is too poor, and the purity is low. Is there any better product?" In fact, Fang Tien couldn't taste anything. The white powder had just entered his nasal cavity and had been refined by him, so he didn't feel anything. Seeing that Fang Tien seemed dissatisfied, the man next to him became anxious and started chattering something, which the guide had no time to translate. Without saying a word, Fang Tien took out a stack of US dollars and threw it on the man. "Stop talking nonsense, get me some good goods. If you don't have them, take me to someone who has them." When the man saw the US dollars, his eyes immediately lit up. Shined. No need to translate, you can understand what Fang Tien means. Nodding and bowing, he led the way. Soon, we arrived in the box. In the box, a muscular middle-aged man, leaning on 2 women with few pieces of cloth on their bodies, was puffing away. Seeing his younger brother walking in with someone, he was a little unhappy. "What's going on? Why did you bring someone to me?" The younger brother quickly returned. "Boss, this person dislikes that my goods are not pure enough. I think he is a fat sheep, so he brought people here." As he said this, he also gestured to the bag Fang Tien was carrying. "Among those who sell drugs, only the boss has high-purity drugs. The purity of those sold by the younger brothers is even less than 50%. Of course, as the purity increases, the price will only increase linearly." Fang Tien didn't really come to buy drugs. The bag full of US dollars in his hand was just a stepping stone. Until now, Something that seemed to have some weight finally appeared in front of me. Regardless of whether this person had any ill intentions towards him, he was ready to take action. The 5 fingers loosened, the package fell to the ground, and the green dollars flowed out. Fang Tien had already strode forward, carrying the 2 naked women out of the box, and sat down with a majestic look. The boss and the thin black boy both looked at Fang Tien with surprise. They looked at Fang Tien as if he was mentally ill. The guide also turned pale with fear and secretly complained in his heart. At first he thought it was a fat sheep, but now it seemed that it was in big trouble. Fang Tien said, "Translate to them and say that I am looking for them to ask them something." The guide was trembling and didn't know what to do. Before the guide could speak, the boss immediately yelled, pulled out the AK-47 from behind the sofa, and aimed it in Fang Tien's direction. Not long after, 20 or 30 boys broke in with guns. Fang Tien calmly said, "It seems that we still have to fight to get what we want. Are everyone here? Let's start." After a disagreement, he started killing. As he spoke, his fingers pointed out one after another, and the room was filled with red light. Not even half a minute after the 20 or 30 boys came in, all of them were already missing their heads. Inside the room, corpses lay everywhere, and blood splattered all over the floor. Only the guide, the boss and Fang Tien were left. The guide was knocked unconscious by Fang Tien first and is still lying on the ground. At this time, Fang Tien was even sitting leisurely on the sofa, not even making a move to get up. The boss was splashed with blood all over his body. He was already fighting with both sides, and the sweat on his forehead was almost forming a stream. He has never seen such a cruel person. As soon as they disagreed, they immediately massacred dozens of people without changing their expressions. He didn't even give anyone a chance to speak. Are they drug dealers, or is the other person a drug dealer? This is simply devilish. Among the heads and broken bodies on the ground, Fang Tien spoke, "Now, can you speak?" The pale-faced boss immediately said, "Sir, what do you want to ask? I will definitely tell you everything." Fang Tien showing a strange expression, "So you can speak English?" The drug dealer boss smiled, "You know a little bit." Fang Tien blamed. "Then I said before, I just want to ask a question, why do you still say hello?" The younger brother comes in. "Look, all the younger brothers are dead now." The drug dealer boss was so aggrieved that he wanted to hit the wall. "What are you talking about? You barged in so arrogantly, why don't you allow me to call you little brother? Besides, you didn't give me a chance to speak." Dozens of younger brothers had just come in and were already slaughtered. He felt wronged, but the boss didn't dare to say it out loud. He just smiled and said, "Your Majesty is right. Everything is my fault. Please forgive me." As he spoke, his heart almost started to bleed. These younger brothers are all his team members. In a matter of 10 seconds, his entire team was defeated. How could he not let his heart bleed? Fang Tien showed his killing methods, and things naturally went much smoother. Local armed forces and terrorists also have to spend money, so where does their money come from? In addition to kidnapping and ransom, a large part relies on gun smuggling and drug dealing. Therefore, this drug dealer boss has also had contact with many local militants. Fang Tien successfully obtained the information he wanted. The approximate locations of several local armed forces were obtained. Once you know this, it will be easier to handle. Fang Tien's first goal is to find them and control them. Before leaving, the boss was naturally not spared in the end, and even his corpse was used by Fang Tien as waste, collected into the space and refined together. After all, no matter how small a mosquito is, it is still a piece of meat. Based on the approximate address given by inquiry, Fang Tien found it. This time, he didn't want people to see his appearance, so he made a demon mask made of steel. Of course, because it is just smelted from ordinary steel, it has no special functions. At most, it's just a little stronger than ordinary steel. Because he was looking for someone, he didn't use space to move and rush, but flew all the way there. While flying, the space sensor opens continuously to avoid missing it. After all, the boss only knew the general direction, he didn't know the specific hiding location. It didn't take long for Fang Tien to find a stronghold. The people in this stronghold, said to be local armed forces, really looked down upon them. In Fang Tien's opinion, they could at most be said to be a group of bandits. But this has nothing to do with Fang Tien. He just wanted to gather some militants. Regardless of whether these militants are bandits or terrorists, it will not affect his actions. Fang Tien flew down from the sky in a swaggering manner. He didn't make any cover-up, so he was quickly discovered by the patrolling officers. Suddenly, the entire village was reminded of the sirens. More than a dozen people held guns and opened fire on Fang Tien without asking. It has to be said that the accuracy of these people was really poor. Fang Tien did not dodge at all. Amidst the gunfire like fried beans, until he landed, he barely received a few shots. This time Fang Tien wanted to keep alive, so naturally he couldn't go on a killing spree. The men continued to shoot. The bullets fired at him had no effect other than splattering a little bit of fire. There were more and more militants at the entrance of the village, and finally 50 or 60 were gathered. At this time, these people had discovered that the bullets were useless against Fang Tien, and they were all horrified. Fang Tien stepped forward, and as he moved forward, the bullets became more dense. Bathed in the hail of bullets, to Fang Tien, these bullets were really just like rain, causing no harm. At this moment, a pickup truck suddenly drove over, with a heavy machine gun riding on the pickup truck. Seeing the pickup truck loaded with heavy machine guns galloping over, the militants on the opposite side cheered. You know, there is a world of difference in power between heavy machine guns and the miniature submachine guns in the hands of these people. In addition to being able to kill enemy cluster targets, the main purpose of heavy machine guns is to destroy light armor, even helicopters. As long as a bullet hits a person, there will immediately be a hole the size of the head, and there is no way to save it. Not to mention, fed by a belt, it can fire 500 to 600 rounds per minute. Before the vehicle arrived, the heavy machine gun started firing. The big tree nearby fell down like wheat, and the dust on the ground splashed up. Fang Tien wanted to establish his power, but he still did not dodge. He was just worried that the devil mask on his face would be broken, so he raised his hands to block his face. Bullets thicker than thumbs were fired at Fang Tien. What made these militants' eyes almost bulge out was that the steel bullets hit him head-on. The whole bullet turned into a pancake shape and fell to the ground weakly. Those that collided with the side would bounce out directly, causing damage to the surrounding flowers, plants and trees. A small tree as thick as a bowl would fall to the ground with just one shot. As for Fang Tien, there were still no scars on his body, and even his skin was as fair and fair. Even the steps he took were as steady as before, without any sway. The cheers from the front stopped abruptly. The devil mask on Fang Tien's face seemed to be grinning, mocking them. Someone finally collapsed and tried to escape, but just as the red light flashed away, the person's head exploded out of thin air. The headless corpse fell to the ground with a crash, splashing dust all over the ground. Before the heart of the fallen corpse had time to stop beating, under the pressure of the heart, the blood in the arteries spurted out and spread all over the ground. At the same time, Fang Tien was already standing in front of this group of people. Everyone had thrown their firearms at their feet and knelt on the ground, trembling. Fang Tien was about to speak when suddenly, a figure appeared on the sunroof of the pickup truck. This figure had an anti-tank missile on its shoulder and had already been launched. In a flash of lightning, a missile as thick as a calf and more than 1 meter long had arrived in front of Fang Tien. Fang Tien pulled away and was more than 10 meters away in the blink of an eye. Missile followed closely and turned to catch up. There was a boom, shrapnel shot out, and Fang Tien was blown up. The militants on the ground all breathed a sigh of relief and exhaled neatly. Even if you are not afraid of bullets, you are not afraid of anti-tank missiles. No matter how strong your body's defense is, can it be stronger than a steel plate dozens of centimeters thick on a tank? In the firelight and smoke, footsteps sounded, and the 50 or 60 people on the opposite side were silent. Could it be that this person was still alive after being hit head-on by a missile? The smoke dissipated, revealing the figure inside. It was Fang Tien. His clothes were in tatters and he had a red steel mask on his face. Around the steel mask, heat waves were rolling and the air was distorted. There was not a trace of scar on his fair skin. To Fang Tien, the power of this missile is nothing, far behind the most powerful laser beam of Cyclops. The reason why he remained silent after being hit was because the mask that was smelted casually on his face was broken, and a new one was smelted just by being blocked by the smoke. This was also the reason why the mask glowed red after he appeared. The armed men on the opposite side didn't know the reason. They just thought it was because their attack angered the devil and made the devil angry. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly, hoping that the devil would let him go. Although Fang Tien was not afraid of this kind of attack, it didn't mean that he had such a good temper that he could be attacked by others. Using strength on his waist and abdomen, he stepped forward like lightning and was already in front of the pickup truck dozens of meters away. He casually tore off the entire car door, grabbed the person in the car by the back of his neck, and threw him to the ground. This man seemed to be physically strong, but in Fang Tien's hands, he was like a child, completely powerless to resist. Fang Tien didn't give this man a chance to explain. This fall had already broken his spine and ruptured his internal organs. I saw blood bleeding from the corner of his mouth, and he was dead. After killing the man who attacked him with missiles, Fang Tien turned around and faced dozens of trembling militants kneeling on the ground. Do you understand English? For a long time, no one responded. Fang Tien kicked out. A pebble on the tip of his toe penetrated the head of the person at the front at a speed faster than a bullet. The person fell to the ground without saying a word and died. Who can understand me? The thought of the chirping noise made Fang Tien's head hurt. Without saying anything, another stone flew out, and one more body fell to the ground. After a few questions, the old rule is that as long as no one answers, one person fell to death immediately. Seeing that Fang Tien was completely merciless, he would kill someone with just one question. He didn't know when it would be his turn. Finally someone couldn't help it and shouted in English, "Sir, I understand English, I can understand English. I wonder what your orders are." The corners of Fang Tien's mouth raised slightly. Of course, he still wore a mask on his face, so no one could see his expression. Very good, no matter who was your leader before, from today on, you will be the leader. The man who spoke was overjoyed. Thank you, sir. Fang Tien asked, what's your name? The man said, Sir, my name is Muhammad Adela Fergus. You can just call me Aid. Fang Tien nodded. Very good, Aid, translate my words to the kneeling people. Listen up, from today on, I am your boss. You can do whatever I say without any objection. Who wouldn't? Aid started to translate to the people kneeling on the ground. No one spoke or moved. Fang Tien added, you must think carefully. If anyone is unwilling, just get up and leave. I will never take action. As soon as these words came out, several people were ready to make a move. Who would be willing to have a grandfather suddenly appear above their head for no reason? A short man kneeling in the middle stood up hesitantly. Fang Tien did not make any move. His face could not be seen under the mask. Someone took the lead, and the remaining people became bolder. One after another, more and more people stood up. In the end, only a few people knelt on the ground. Looking at the figures standing up, Fang Tien sneered in his heart, just to use you to establish his authority. If I don't take action or even move my whole body, can you escape? Stand still. 3 color flames appeared out of thin air on the people who stood up. These people screamed and rolled on the ground, but the 3 color flames burned bigger and bigger, and they could not be extinguished. Listen to these people, there were screams, and the people kneeling on the ground had a look of joy on their faces. At this moment, a person with flames on his body suddenly rushed towards the crowd, wanting to die with the people on the ground. Someone on the ground couldn't dodge, and was killed. The flames stuck to their bodies. Strangely enough, the flames fell on them but did not cause any damage. On the contrary, those who were quick to react and get out of the way were in bad luck, and one after another a flame floated over them, contaminated them. Several more human-shaped torches appeared around them. Fang Tien's voice came. Did I ask you to stand up? Since you don't obey orders, let's die together. As he spoke, the fire exploded, and more than 40 people were instantly reduced to ashes. The remaining militants were trembling with fear, sweating profusely, and some even had feces and urine flowing out. They couldn't figure it out, and they all said it was water and fire. Ruthless, why are the people who are not burned by the flames unscathed, but the people who avoid them are turned into ashes? The only thing they know is probably that they cannot disobey Fang Tien's orders, otherwise, they will definitely die without a burial place. Looking at the surrounding scenes, Fang Tien felt satisfied. It seemed that the purpose of establishing power was achieved. However, in the end, only 19 of the 50 or 60 people were left, which was not enough people. Aid, wake them up. Are there any other militants nearby? Come with me to do a sweep. Hearing this, Aid cheered up. Is this a plan to expand territory? With such a powerful person leading the way, who can withstand it? Is it possible that he will become the leader of a large territory in the future? Poor Aid still doesn't know that since being selected by Fang Tien, the fate of these people has been doomed. Not to mention a large territory, even their lives cannot be saved. Next, Fang Tien followed the method at the first militant stronghold. Everywhere he went, he first killed people to establish his authority, and then summoned the remaining people and asked them to follow suit. Easily, he recovered more than 100 people. Of course, during this process, far more than 100 people were burned to ashes by the true fire of samadhi. These people can be regarded as making a small contribution to Fang Tien, which increased his strength a little. Needless to say, the loyalty of these more than 100 people is very insufficient. If given the chance, Fang Tien believed that they would betray him. But this is not a problem. To him, these hundreds of people are just disposable items. Fang Tien does not expect them to remain loyal at all. He doesn't want to rule a country. With more than 100 people, it is enough. The next thing to do is to wait for the prey to come to your door. As for Fang Tien's prey, it goes without saying that it is Iron Man, Tony Stark. How many other people are worth his troubles? The days of waiting are always difficult. During this period, Fang Tien mainly did several things. The first thing was to find a remote valley and let nearly 100 people dig a deep cave. This cave will be Iron Man's residence from now on. During this process, someone tried to escape. Fang Tien was rude to these people, and all those who escaped were burned to ashes alive in front of everyone. The second thing was to raid several terrorist strongholds and find some missiles produced by Stark Enterprises. Fortunately, Stark Enterprises can be said to be one of the largest arms suppliers in the world, and their various missiles are not difficult to find. After all, there are always some terrorists who have the means to smuggle or simply obtain some missiles from the US military. Don't think that the US military is just a puddle of clear water. There are a lot of moths in it. These missiles are also prepared for Iron Man. Without these raw materials, no matter how high Tony Stark's IQ is, he can't build a suit out of sand. If it were Fang Tien, using the weapon refining method, it would really be possible to refine a magic weapon out of sand. The last thing, of course, is to find a doctor. This doctor is also not a good person. He specializes in the sale of human organs. As for the source of the organs, would anyone care if a handful of refugees disappeared during the war? Anyway, his buyers definitely don't care about the origin of these organs. As long as it allows them to survive, they are willing to do anything to kill people. Let alone buying an organ from the black market, to these people, it is nothing. When he found this doctor again, Fang Tien made up his mind. This doctor doesn't want to run away this time, he might as well die here. Although he himself is not a good person, just thinking about removing human organs from a living person makes people shudder. Leaving such scumbags alive in the world is simply polluting the air. After finishing these few things, it can be said that everything is ready, all I owe is Tony. Some people may ask, what exactly does Fang Tien want to do by expending so much effort? It's easy to decide who he wants to be. In fact, what he wants to do is steal Iron Man's technology. Among them, there are two most important ones. The first is the manufacturing technology of the Ark, and the second is naturally the manufacturing technology of the steel suit. He wanted these two technologies not for himself. After all, what could be more useful to him than his own body? Iron Man's armor is just a delicacy in his heart. He mainly does it for his woman. He is not afraid of any enemy, but according to his behavior, he will definitely provoke countless enemies in the future. He can't always be by his woman's side, there will always be times when he neglects her. So what should we do at this time? The best way is of course to let your woman have the power to protect herself. Tony's steel armor is a good choice. Of course, Fang Tien didn't want to use the steel armor directly. Ordinary steel armor, even if he could get one from Tony Stark in the future, it wouldn't take long. Precise things like steel armor must be inspected after each use, and subsequent maintenance and upkeep is also a big problem. Fang Tien is neither a rich man like Iron Man nor as wealthy as the military. It is not easy to support a steel armor. What he wanted to do was to refine a similar magic weapon based on the manufacturing technology of steel armor. In terms of refining magic weapons, offensive magic weapons are the easiest to refine, while defensive magic weapons are more difficult. For a while, Fang Tien really didn't have the ability to refine steel armor on his own. And now, isn't it the best time to steal Tony's lead? If Fang Tien doesn't get involved now, with Iron Man's attitude towards the iron armor in the future, he will be closer to him than to his own son. Getting this kind of technology will probably be harder than robbing his wife. What's more, watching Tony make the steel armor from scratch, isn't it equivalent to having the best teacher teaching him step by step? If you still can't learn it like this, you can only blame yourself for being stupid and nothing else. It's almost time to make all the preparations. Fang Tien was in the room, watching the news on the TV. What was broadcast on the news was the military's summit award ceremony. The award ceremony was now in progress when Colonel Rhodes presented Tony with the award. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to announce that the Capstone Award of the Year is presented to Mr. Tony Stark. There was fierce applause from the audience. Colonel Rhodes picked up the trophy and looked down, but did not see Tony. He forced a stiff smile from his face. Tony. No one answered. The scene became awkward. When Fang Tien saw this, he stopped watching. Things were no different from how they had developed in the previous life. Fang Tien knew that it was time for Obadiah to come to the rescue. As for Tony, Stark didn't know where he was at ease. Things developed as he expected, without any deviation. Seeing this, Fang Tien felt relieved. It seemed that Iron Man would set off for Afghanistan soon. If this matter changed because of his little butterfly, wouldn't his busyness during this period have been in vain? In that case, the scene would be very embarrassing. As Fang Tien waited, time passed by. On this day, Fang Tien took the terrorists he had subdued, fully armed, and ambush on the road outside Baghlan Air Force Base. This Baghlan Air Force Base is where Iron Man demonstrated Jerry to the military. Fang Tien has already found the location of the Kudos missile. After all, planes often take off and land, so it cannot be hidden from anyone. It is said to be outside the base, but in fact it is still more than 10 miles away. Unless you use a high magnification telescope, otherwise you can't see anything. But this distance is nothing in Fang Tien's eyes. As he upgrades, his 5 senses become more and more acute. With his eyesight, a distance of more than 10 miles is only it was almost the same as before, and I could still see it clearly. Not long after, I saw a passenger plane landing. On the plane, Tony Stark, wearing a suit and leather shoes and wearing sunglasses, came down. There were already people from the military in the base. People were waiting, and when they saw Tony walking down, the two sides greeted each other. After all, they were from the military, and they were resolute. After getting to know each other, they didn't waste any time and immediately drove along the road to the weapons testing site. The convoy left. This is the road where Fang Tien ambushed. After all, the missile test cannot be carried out in the Air Force Base. Fang Tien watched the convoy drive past, but did not take action. Just kidding. He knew that there was another group of terrorists ambushing waiting for that group of terrorists to take action first. They will just catch the cicada with the Oriole behind, so why bother to do it yourself? In the tranquility, the test of the Jericho missile was a perfect success, and the military people took action on Jericho. I was very satisfied with the power of the missile. After drinking the lively celebration wine, the convoy left the test site. Suddenly, a landmine exploded, knocking the entire vehicle to the ground. Several soldiers in the vehicle were shattered to pieces on the spot. With this, as the horn sounded, gunshots sounded like fried beans. The United States has always been the world's hegemon and is used to being domineering. How could it have thought that someone would dare to attack its own army? In addition, after the successful weapons test, most people relaxed. Be alert. This time, you were hit immediately. In the fierce exchange of fire, each armed vehicle was destroyed. Many terrorists fell, but more American soldiers fell. Tony Stark was originally in the vehicle, enjoying the admiration of the soldiers. Suddenly, gunshots were heard around him. His face suddenly turned pale. What's going on? Before he finished speaking, there was a bullet hole in the windshield. The soldier who had been chatting and laughing with him just now had his brains exploded and splashed all over him. Tony Stark wiped his face blankly, his whole face, his body was covered with wet and hot stuff, and it was still flowing down. He was not the Iron Man in the future, so had he ever seen such a tragic scene? He was so frightened that he lost his mind on the spot. At this time, a soldier beside him called out after he fired the gun and was about to open the door and get out of the car. Tony grabbed him and said, "What are you going to do?" At this critical moment, the soldier had no time to explain to him. "Hurry up and hide, I'll go check on the situation and support my teammates." As he spoke, he broke away from Tony's hand and forcibly got out of the car. Before Tony could hide, the soldier fell to the ground as soon as he took a few steps and stopped moving. The red blood gradually spread from under him, dyeing a large area of the ground red. Tony got out of the car regardless, trying to escape. There was the sound of gunfire all around, the battlefield was in chaos, and no one saw his actions. He threw himself down behind a big stone, he took out his mobile phone and wanted to call for help. However, before he could make a call, a missile suddenly flew over and landed next to Tony. The missile exploded and debris flew everywhere. He fainted on the spot and lost consciousness. Tony fainted in the battlefield, but the battle did not end. In the end, the well-prepared terrorists gained the upper hand and wiped out all the American soldiers. After the battle, the terrorists were cleaning up the battlefield, and someone discovered Tony, who had fainted. According to the employer's commission, the terrorists were supposed to shoot Tony dead, but for some reason, they changed their minds. After a simple bandage, Tony was loaded into the vehicle and returned to the court. The battlefield was a mess, with debris of vehicles and dead American troops everywhere. On the road, this wave of terrorists were talking, laughing and in high spirits. "You must know that this wave of business is a big one. After this business is completed, even if most of it is divided by the boss, a lot of it can be divided into their hands, enough for them to spend lavishly for a whole year. How could they not be happy with such a good thing? Even though a lot of people died just now, we all walked out in a hail of bullets, so how many dead people have we seen? As long as you don't die, it's worth being happy." Suddenly, there was an explosion, the first car of the convoy flew into the sky, and more than 100 people attacked with guns. It was as if the prospect had reappeared, except that last time they were hunters, this time they became prey. After the battle just now, they were exhausted and had consumed a lot of ammunition, but they still fought and defended each other with the people who had just rushed up, fighting back and forth. Fang Tien, who was in midair, looked at the messy battlefield below and shook his head. This group of freedom fighters is not an elite army, but compared to the 150 people gathered by Fang Tien, I really don't know how smart they are. The freedom fighters formed a scattered defense line relying on vehicles, supporting each other and forming a firepower network covering the entire defense line. The mob gathered by Fang Tien had no command at all, and even the attack was swarmed in one fell swoop. If they hadn't known that there was still a way to survive if they moved forward, but if they retreated, they would immediately end up in a dead end, and they would have been defeated by the freedom fighters long ago. Fang Tien sighed. Originally, he was not going to take action today, but looking at the current situation, he had no choice but to take action. The hundreds of people below are really a bunch of rubbish. They are no match for the exhausted enemies who have just experienced the battle. If there was no use in keeping these people, he would have decided to shoot them to death with his own hands. There is a fierce battle on the battlefield, bullets are flying everywhere, and there are explosions everywhere. Suddenly, a rocket that had just flown out exploded in the air, sending shrapnel flying everywhere. The freedom fighters suffered heavy casualties, and 7 or 8 people lay on the ground wailing. A bald man was shocked and shouted angrily, "What's going on? How could the rocket explode in our own place?" A young man next to him pointed tremblingly upward, "Boss, there is someone above." It was Fang Tien who took action. He is not a good person to begin with, he is a complete egoist, and the people below are all terrorists. If he takes action, he will not show any mercy. The bald man below looked familiar to him. Maybe a small supporting role in a previous life movie. But it doesn't matter, they are all going to die anyway. "What are you still doing? Fire!" An angry shout rang out. Accompanied by the angry shout, there were the roars of several machine guns, and more than a dozen shoulder-resistant rockets, flying towards the figure in the sky with blazing flames. The mob gathered by Fang Tien gloated. Now, people are suffering from the same fear as themselves. Sure enough, under the horrified eyes of the freedom fighters, Fang Tien, who was hit by the fire, was not injured at all. He just shook his head. Now the bullets have little effect on me. In this case, you just die. As he spoke, a red light seemed to flash. From the inside to the outside, the heads of the terrorists on the freedom fighters' side exploded one after another, and their bodies, empty from the neck up, staggered down. Even the people hiding behind the defenses, it was no exception. In the blink of an eye, it seemed that his men were almost gone. The bald man opened his mouth to speak, but Fang Tien did not give him this chance. The flames passed by, and he had turned into ashes, drifting with the wind. On the battlefield there was silence. Even the group of people who had experienced Fang Tien's ability were dumbfounded. In less than half a minute, they were beaten back, and all the heavily armed terrorists were dead. BCDH, what a terrifying power this is! Fang Tien shouted. What are you still doing? Retreat. Iron Man, who was in a coma, didn't know that he had fallen into the hands of another person silently. Fang Tien flew down from the sky. Tell them to clean the battlefield, take the unconscious man and go back. Said. Those who were seriously injured were shot dead, saving them the pain. Those who could be saved were carried into cars, and the group quickly retreated. Before leaving, Fang Tien had a thought. If he left the battlefield alone, everyone would be able to tell that Iron Man had been kidnapped by another group of people. He might as well let this group of freedom fighters disappear silently. I saw vehicles and corpses abandoned on the battlefield disappearing silently, and even the sand stained with blood disappeared out of thin air. Fang Tien was cleaning the battlefield, and suddenly, he made a new discovery. When the battle was going on, there was a lot of noise on the battlefield, and he was at high altitude, so he actually let a man lie on the ground and pretended to be dead without noticing. A playful smile appeared on his face. Here on the ground, how long are you going to lie down? The battlefield was quiet, except for the sound of the wind, there was no movement. Fang Tien lost interest. Forget it, you are all going to die anyway, why am I talking so much nonsense to you? A man lying on the ground pretending to be dead felt something was wrong and jumped up. Wait, I have. Before he finished speaking, a black hole appeared out of thin air above him, and the corpses around him seemed to be pulled in out of thin air and disappeared. The man hugged the boulder for dear life, resisting the suction. Looking at the scene that looked like the end of the world around him, his face was full of despair. Are you a demon that eats everything? As he spoke, he finally couldn't resist the suction of the black hole, and his whole body and the big stone in his arms disappeared into the depths. There was not a single ripple in the bottomless black hole. After Fang Tien cleaned up the entire battlefield, only a piece of white land remained. The sand and dust blew past, burying all traces. The man who pretended to be dead before looked familiar to Fang Tien. Maybe he is also a character who appeared in the previous movie, but according to the current development, it doesn't matter. No matter who he is, since you are still trying to pretend to be dead in front of him, then let him really die. In the battlefield, Fang Tien's figure flickered and disappeared. Looking at the still intact team, Fang Tien laughed silently. It seems that these people have been convinced by his training. Even after he left, no one tried to escape. However, with Fang Tien's superhuman 5 senses and space sensing, if someone really escapes, that is the only way to die. Now, Iron Man has fallen into his hands, allowing him to flatten and round him. Thinking about this scene, Fang Tien still felt a little excited. In a dark cave, Tony Stark woke up in a daze. He sat up and suddenly felt something pulling in front of him, causing excruciating pain. He fumbled and tore off the gauze on his body, and saw that under the gauze, his body was embedded with a metal object slightly larger than his fist. On this metal object, there were 2 metal wires connected to the battery on the side. Tony suddenly lost his cool. What is this? What did you do to me? In the darkness, there was a clanging sound, and a figure wearing full body armor came out and made a hoarse voice. If it were you, I wouldn't try to take down the thing that protects my life. This figure is naturally Fang Tien. He might come into contact with Iron Man in the future, so in order not to expose his flaws, he had no choice but to make this move. As for the magnet shielding device in front of Iron Man, of course it was made for Tony by the black-hearted doctor who was engaged in organ trafficking. One thing I have to mention is that although the doctor has a dark heart, he is actually a surgeon with exquisite skills. Of course, at this time, the doctor had disappeared without a trace. Tony calmed down a little and raised his eyebrows. So, Mr. Hidden Kidnapper, I wonder what your purpose is. Fang Tien thought to himself. It seems that he is still too good to him. Without Fang Tien's signal, someone immediately stepped forward from behind, pressed hard, and immersed his head in the water. Tony struggled hard. How could he survive the power of these terrorists? I was choked and coughed again and again, and drank several times of water. With time running out, the terrorist pulled Tony's hair and pulled him out of the water. Without saying a word, he punched and kicked Tony in the face. 10 minutes later, Tony's nose was bruised and his face was swollen, and Fang Tien sat leisurely opposite him. Of course Fang Tien is not a sadist. He lets Iron Man do this just to let Iron Man know that he has fallen into the hands of terrorists and to make him understand what a miserable life he will live in the future if he does not escape. Rich man, Mr. Playboy. Teach you to be a good boy. You'd better be obedient here with us. What's more, strictly speaking, I am still your savior. Fang Tien added in his heart, pulling you out of one fire pit and pushing you into another fire pit. This can be regarded as saving your life. After education, Tony also knew that the group of people in front of him were nothing. Good stubble. In front of them, it is better for you to be honest, otherwise, you will be the one who suffers. But he has that kind of temper, and when he speaks, he can't help but say sarcastically, well, Mr. Savior, what do you want in return? For Tony's sarcasm, Fang Tianping was calm this time. In the past, he would seek a beating for himself, and occasionally beat someone else violently. This person will still be the famous Iron Man in the future. This feeling is very good. If it weren't for the Tony in front of him. For him, it was so weak that he felt itchy and wanted to try it out. Fang Tien still followed the old routine. I have to say, the Jericho missile is really a masterpiece. As you said yourself, find an excuse, fire one, and the enemy will smell it immediately. Fang Tien's face was full of enthusiasm. As long as there are Jericho missiles, the whole thing will be shaken. While pretending to be full of fanaticism, he complained in his heart how ignorant the original terrorist was. Did he want to rule the world with just a missile? Tony looked excited. Don't even think about it. I will never do anything for terrorists like you. The two people behind Fang Tien wanted to step forward again. He waved his hands to stop them. Anyway, his goal was not the Jericho missile. As long as Tony was here, he would definitely find a way to escape. Fang Tien's goal would be that's it. He said to Tony, you should think about it, I will come to you again. After that, without looking at Tony's face, he stood up and left. With a clang, the heavy iron door of the cave was closed, leaving only Tony Stark, whose face was dimmed by the shaking light. Suddenly, Tony, as if I remembered something, I picked up the battery, ran to the iron gate, and slammed the iron gate. Wait. How do I go to the toilet? Asking for flowers. There was silence outside the door, no one answered. Tony yelled and yelled to no avail, but no one paid any attention to him. In the cave, after Tony vented his anger, he finally calmed down and thought about his situation. He first observed his surroundings. Apparently, he was in a cave. The soil on the cave walls is still fresh, probably just dug out. This made him a little disappointed. Deep in the heart of the mountain, there is no way to send out a distress signal. How can I escape? First of all, let's make it clear that I was kidnapped. Although I don't know why the robbers claimed to have saved his life, these robbers are not kind. Tony touched his bruised face, feeling distressed. This was the guy he was picking up girls for dinner with. How could those people do this? 0. Tony was groping around in the cave, and everything around him was solid. Except for the heavy iron door, there was no exit. After an unknown amount of time, his stomach growled. Since he fell into coma and had an operation, he has not had a drop of water at all. He was already ravenous when he was talking to Fang Tien just now. It was just that at that time, he was still in fear and ignored the matter. Touching his belly, Tony walked around in the small cave. In the end, he suddenly discovered that these robbers were so irresponsible that they didn't even leave him a glass of water. Do you want to starve him to death? Tony couldn't help but curse. You are a bunch of fools, the scum of society. Do you want to starve your grandfather to death? You don't even leave me water, and you want me to help you make missiles. He had finished cursing, but no one answered. The cave was quiet except for his voice. After struggling for a long time, Tony finally gave up. Outside the cave, the corners of Fang Tien's mouth curled up. He did it on purpose to starve Tony. Who knows how long Tony is prepared to resist, so it would be best to urge him. It was not until noon the next day that Fang finally entered the cave again. This time, Tony no longer had the energy to sarcastically say. Including the operation time, he has been without water for more than 30 hours. Seeing Fang Tien lying weakly on the broken wooden board, Tony's eyes lit up, as if he had seen a savior, and he almost burst into tears. His lips were chapped and his voice was hoarse. I said, you kidnapped me not to starve me to death in this small cave, right? Fang Tien chuckled and brought out a small glass of water and a small piece of bread. Tony's eyes lit up when he saw the water glass, and he immediately got up, picked up the water glass and drank it all in one gulp. 150 is a small glass of water, which is probably only about 100 milliliters. How can it satisfy Tony, who has been thirsty all day? Looking left and right, Fang Tien had nothing else in his hands. His eyes widened. Are you too stingy? You can't even provide a few glasses of water. Fang Tien chuckled. When did you start working? There will be sufficient food supply. Otherwise, there will only be so much in one day. As he spoke, Fang Tien frowned. Did you defecate on the ground yesterday? Tony blushed. What do you mean? Do you think I am willing? My voice was hoarse yesterday, and I didn't see any of you answering, and now you blame me. Fang Tien didn't pursue it. What did you think about it? You are the only one who started working. There will be enough food, otherwise, there will only be so much in a day. After speaking, he raised the water glass and bread in his hand. This little food and water was probably just enough to keep Tony from starving to death, but being hungry and thirsty all day long was unavoidable. Thinking that he might stay in a dark cave and live a life like hell in the future, Tony couldn't help but shudder. But that didn't make him give in. Don't even think about it. Fang Tien heard this and turned around and left without stopping. Listening to Fang Tien's clanging footsteps, Tony's eyes lit up and he had an idea in his mind. Wait. Fang Tien turned his head. Oh, changed your mind? Tony nodded repeatedly. Yes, I will start to do it right away. You work. However, I need tools and materials. Fang Tien was secretly happy. It seems that steel warfare has appeared. He was wearing a suit of iron armor. In addition to covering himself, he also wanted to remind Tony. Finally, his efforts were not in vain. Fang Tien had already prepared the materials and various tools. Various Stark Enterprises missiles, acetylene cutters, tools, workbenches, plus various gadgets are all available. Seeing that Stark had finally entered the state, Fang Tien stopped disturbing him. This time, there is no Ethan in the original scene, but it doesn't matter. The doctor was just a helper. Even without him, the iron suit can still be borne. With the hope of escaping, Tony was full of energy. The first thing he has to do is to disassemble the metal palladium from the missile to make a small arc reactor to sustain his life. Fang Tien was in another room, turning on the space induction, and watched with his own eyes as the arc reactor took shape bit by bit from the very beginning of the coil. Just 2 days later, the fist-sized, round arc reactor was completed. As Tony completed the final assembly step, the arc reactor lit up slightly, indicating that the production was successful. Looking at the reactor next door, Fang Tien felt that he only saw extremely delicious pastries, which seemed to still have an alluring sweetness, which almost made his mouth water. He wanted to grab the arc reactor immediately and take a bite. Taste what it tastes like. However, he forcibly held back, telling himself that now was not the time, and there would be plenty of opportunities to taste it in the future. Tony installed the arc reactor in front of him, finally getting rid of the bulky battery. Tony works in the cave, and no one disturbs him except the people who deliver food and water on time every day. Even Fang Tien only went in occasionally to show his presence, which made Tony nervous for a while. What made Tony relieved was that these terrorists didn't seem to understand missiles at all, allowing him to make what he expected piece by piece. On the other side, as the sleep time passed day by day, Fang Tien watched Tony make the parts of the steel armor with his own eyes. Each piece of outer armor was hammered and welded by Tony himself. The mechanical structure, power system, movement system, and flight system of the entire armor are also completed bit by bit. This is exactly what Fang Tien wants to see. If only 3.7 is to make an iron shell, there is no need to go to such trouble. Fang Tien can directly refine it now. But what he wanted to create was a complete system that was made up of parts that worked together to form a whole. This system needs to be able to walk, fly, fight and resist, and the control should be simple enough that ordinary people can operate it. This is more difficult. Fang Tien does not have this ability for the time being. That's why he thought of stealing from Iron Man. During this period, Fang Tien gained a lot. Under the spatial induction, there is no secret in everything, and the functions of all parts are invisible to him. It can be said that even if Fang Tien is asked to make a steel armor as it is, it will not be difficult for him. At this point, his basic purpose has been achieved. Seeing the steel armor taking shape bit by bit, the entire power unit has been completed and has been tested by Tony and is operating completely normally. Tony has now begun to prepare to build a weapon system. In this simple environment, of course, no sophisticated weapons can be built, only simple small missiles and two-arm flamethrowers. In his expectation, this steel armor relied on its invulnerable defense and powerful force to force open the iron door and break through the cave. As long as he gets outside and relies on small missiles and flamethrowers to create chaos, when the time comes he soars into the sky, who can stop him? Thinking of this, Tony became more motivated. After 12 hours, the terrorists didn't seem to notice anything unusual, and they just kept urging him to speed up his progress. This situation also made Tony secretly laugh at them. After all, they were just terrorists. They couldn't even tell the difference between missiles and steel armor. When Fang Tien saw this, he knew it was time for him to appear. He has now completely watched the entire process of making steel armor. As long as he has the right materials, he has the confidence to use the weapon refining method to refine a more perfect armor. The rest is no longer necessary. Read on. He directed and acted in the whole thing. At this point, if Tony were to break out on his own, how unfulfilling would it be? Tony was immersed in making a flamethrower. Suddenly, a breeze blew through the cave, and a figure appeared silently beside him. Fang Tien patted him on the shoulder and said in a frivolous tone, "Hey, why do you look so much like the famous Tony Stark?" Tony, who was busy, stiffened, and with a clang, the tool in his hand fell to the ground, on the ground. He slowly turned around and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that it was not the terrorists outside. Immediately, he realized that since this person was not a terrorist, how did he get in so silently? Tony lowered his voice and looked anxious. "Who are you? How did you get in?" At this time, Fang Tien, of course, showed his true colors. He was dressed in casual clothes, holding any weapon in his hand, looking leisurely. Fang Tien didn't answer his words, and walked around the cave with a click of his tongue. It seems that Tony Stark, who is widely rumored to have been kidnapped, has been living in a place like this. This is inconsistent with your identity. Ah. Tony looked at his arrogance and said, "Now that you know I was kidnapped, why are you so careless?" Fang Tien shook his head with a look of contempt. The losers outside can stare them to death with just one glance. Tony was angry and funny. If he hadn't been worried about the armed men guarding the door outside, he would have almost laughed out loud. Stare them to death with one look. I've never seen anyone who can stare them to death with their eyes. Seeing that Tony didn't believe it, Fang Tien he simply said, "Let me tell you, do you want to go out?" Tony's expression brightened, and then he remembered that no matter how the person in front of him came in, since he could come in silently, he should also be able to come in silently. "Get out." His tone suddenly changed. "Sir, please take me out. Since you know my identity, you should be able to understand that I can give you a satisfactory reward." Fang Tien shook his head indifferently. Why, could it be the famous Tony Stark can only talk nonsense? If someone dared to say that to him outside, he would kill the person with money. But now, people under the eaves have to bow their heads. Tony lowered his stance. "I don't know what you want in return." Fang Tien circled around Tony. What do you have? Tony looked at Fang Tien's eyes scanning him up and down, and felt horrified and covered his head. He stood behind himself and almost jumped up. Don't even think about it. Fang Tien was almost angry. Does this Tony have any sense of shame? He simply said in a longer voice, I want you. Tony waved his hands repeatedly, retreated again and retreated to a corner, with his hands in front of his body. Don't come close, if you come closer, I will scream. Fang Tien looked puzzled. Where did you think you were going? I mean, I feel that 20% of Stark Industries shares are in line with your worth. It was Tony's shamelessness, but after listening to Fang Tien's words, his face turned green and white, changing constantly. It was wonderful. Fang Tien laughed when he saw it. He tidied up his clothes in a concealed manner and cleared his throat. This is completely impossible. You are talking nonsense. Do you know how much the shares of Stark Industries are worth? Finally, he added, I think 0.5% is a very good price. Just relying on dividends will be enough for you to live a luxurious life. Fang Tien thought in his mind that Tony wanted to send away the beggar. It seemed that he was about to finish the steel armor, and he was confident that even if he couldn't get out now, he would be able to get out in a few days. But, how could Fang Tien let him have his wish? Fang Tien was amazed. I didn't expect that the life of the famous genius, playboy, and controller of Stark Industries is only worth 0.5% of the shares. Or do you have another one? Reliance, he said, walking towards the place where the parts of the steel armor were placed. Tony looked nervous, but there was nothing he could do about Fang Tien's actions. Now his life can be said to depend on Fang Tien's thoughts. Fang Tien doesn't need to do anything. He only needs to shout and he will be unlucky. Therefore, how can he dare to intercept Fang Tien? He casually picked up a piece of steel outer armor and threw it in the air. Is this your confidence? He said, tearing it apart with both hands. With a stabbing sound, the steel plate more than 10 millimeters thick was torn in half like a piece of paper in Fang Tien's hands. At this moment, Tony looked straight in the eyes. You must know that this is nothing else but a steel plate more than 10 millimeters thick. Even the bullets couldn't penetrate it, so they were torn apart by the weak man in front of them. This is simply not a human, but a humanoid Ultraman. Just listen to Fang Tien say again. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it. If you exceed this time, you will be responsible for the consequences. Before Tony could figure out what Fang Tien meant, Fang Tien shouted, Here, there is someone I want to escape from prison. A thunderous voice echoed in the cave, making his ears buzz. As soon as this loud shout came out, the armed men guarding outside the cave panicked. What's the situation? If the devil knew that someone had entered the cave under their guard, could their lives be saved? Amidst the cheers, the men ran over with guns in hand. Tony was stunned as he heard the chaos outside. How could there be such shameless people in the world? If you don't agree, will you buy or sell by force? Moreover, the bargaining chip used in this forced buying and selling is still one's own life. At this moment, Tony wanted to strangle Fang Tien to death. Seeing that Tony was still in a daze, Fang Tien urged, Have you thought about it? The terrorists outside are about to rush in. I don't think they are as easy to talk to as me. Tony yelled angrily. You call it easy to talk? You are simply... He stammered for a long time, but couldn't find the words to describe Fang Zong's bad behavior. Fang Tien took out a pen and paper with a smile, and there were a few big words on the top. Share transfer contract. Come on, do you want to sign? This is not my voluntary behavior on your part. But think about it, my debt is not bad. At this time, there was a banging sound on the iron door of the cave. The angry curses of countless terrorists were also heard. Seeing that the iron door was crumbling, Tony was shocked. He pushed the workbench with all his strength and pressed against the iron door, temporarily stabilizing the situation. Fang Tien stood by and watched, neither helping nor stopping, but just kept saying sarcastic words. You have to think about it quickly, 2 iron doors cannot withstand terrorists for long. Tony knew that Fang Tien was telling the truth. Even if he was deeply hurt by his act of setting fire and taking advantage of the fire, there was still nothing he could do. The steel armor was still a pile of parts, lying scattered on the ground, trying to rely on it. It's impossible to put it on by yourself without dozens of minutes. But will the terrorists outside give him dozens of minutes? Moreover, the weapon system has not yet been manufactured. Even if you put on the armor, it will only have strong defense and strength. It wasn't certain whether he could break out. He was hoping to break out by himself, but suddenly a man appeared, claiming to be able to save him, and forced him into a corner. What could he do? After thinking about it, besides relying on what was in front of him, this man, he has no other way to survive. Do we really want him to sign a share transfer contract? But if this is the case, it will be really unacceptable. Tony's thoughts are racing, but his expression is hesitant. Let him making this kind of decision is like slicing flesh. The banging on the door outside became more urgent, and there were even gunshots like exploding beans. Obviously, these terrorists were already anxious. Although the iron door is thick, it is also durable. If you can't stand this kind of torture, you are about to collapse. Fang Tien's hateful voice came over again. I said you really want money rather than life. Is it easy to think about this kind of thing for so long? If I keep so much money, am I going to wait for you to go to hell and let you burn the watery little secretary to you? Upon hearing this, Tony was furious, another little Pepper's idea. Fang Tianjian laughed and said, when you die, will you still be able to take care of little Pepper? Think about Pepper being with another man, how do you feel? Get Lee. Veins popped up on Tony's face, but Pepper was indeed his Achilles heel, and this became the last straw that broke the camel's back. 20% is absolutely impossible, at most 10%. If not, you might as well just leave me here and let me be beaten to death. Fang Tien clapped his hands. Very good, you made a right choice. With a flip of his wrist, there was another contract in his hand. In fact, Fang Tien had been prepared for this. He also knew that it was impossible to get 20% of the shares from Tony. You know, although Tony is the largest shareholder of the industry, but he owns less than half of the shares. After giving up 20%, if Fang Tien goes against him, his position will be in jeopardy. Being able to get 10% of the shares was enough for Fang Tien to be satisfied. This is a fortune worth tens of billions of dollars. The whole thing was directed and acted by Fang Tien. In this kidnapping incident, he not only obtained the production technology of steel armor and small arc reactor, but he could even become a shareholder of Stark Industries. What did he have to be dissatisfied with? What about? The situation was urgent, and Tony didn't have time to read the contract carefully. He took a quick glance at it, took the pen, and signed his name. Fang Tien also reminded from the side, don't worry, put your fingerprints on it too. Iron Man put on his own fingerprints with an expressionless face. Who knows the pain in his heart? In that moment, his wealth shrank by tens of billions of dollars. Fang Tien put away the contract with a smile, not worried about what Iron Man would do. Even if Tony has any thoughts in his heart, I believe he will put them aside after seeing his performance. Seeing Fang Tien's happy expression, Tony became increasingly unhappy and said sarcastically, why am I still waiting for you to stare these people to death? Are you just an arrogant maniac? Before he finished speaking, Fang Tien suddenly two thick red lights shot out from his eyes, grazed Tony's cheek, and hit the iron door behind him that was blocked by the workbench. In the blink of an eye, the entire thick iron door was twisted and deformed, and the steel bolts embedded in the cave wall collapsed everywhere. 150 didn't hold on for a second. The iron door emitting high heat flew back, smashing the people behind the door into meat patties. The red-hot iron plate stuck to the flesh and blood, making a sizzling sound, and a smell of meat wafted out. Come over. Fang Tien's laser beam was non-stop, and red shock waves with a diameter of nearly 1 meter were continuously emitted from his eyes. The dozens of militants gathered in the cave had no time to even dodge, and were turned into meat by the shock wave. By now, there seemed to be almost no terrorists behind the door, but Fang Tien didn't give up and shot out continuous red light. It didn't stop until the entire tens of meters thick mountain at the corner of the passage was shot through. At this time, under the high heat of the laser light, the entire passage was filled with heat waves, and the surrounding cave walls had been melted into BCDH magma, flowing everywhere. The bright light shone in from the outside, and the entire stone chamber glowed red through the magma. The hair on the side of Tony's face was also burned into smoke. He turned his head stiffly and looked at the magma channel behind him. The iron gate, workbench, and dozens of armed men at the rear have all disappeared, leaving only the red magma slowly flowing outward. Fortunately, Fang Tien deliberately tilted the laser beam downward slightly. Otherwise, the entire stone chamber would have been flooded by magma. In the valley outside the passage, lava gurgled downwards, forcing the surviving kidnappers to hide in all directions. Unable to dodge, he was submerged by the magma and immediately transformed into a human-shaped torch. Screaming loudly, but to no avail, he watched helplessly as he transformed into the magma. From time to time, missiles were detonated, making loud noises, and hot magma flew everywhere along with the shock wave. Once it falls on someone, a heart-breaking scream can be heard. Iron Man was silent for a long time before finally speaking out in a dry voice, "Is this what you call staring?" Fang Tien looked innocent. "That's right, didn't you see, I just stared several times." Here for a moment, Iron Man even had the idea that the iron armor was just a toy. Compared to Fang Tien's so-called glaring several times, what was the steel armor that made him so proud? "I can't even bear the stares from others, so don't even want this kind of thing." Then he comforted himself. Judging from the power of this glare, even he couldn't use it continuously. Besides, no matter how powerful his powers are, he is at most physically stronger than an ordinary person. There are plenty of ways to deal with him. His previous act of tearing up steel plates with his hands must have been done with the assistance of supernatural powers. Iron Man comforted himself for a long time before he calmed down. He was even planning in his mind what kind of armor to make to restrain Fang Tien's ability. If Fang Tien knew what Iron Man was thinking, he would laugh his head off. What does it mean to have a body that is just an ordinary person? Does he know that Grandpa's strongest thing is this body? Even if you don't have any special abilities, you can still dominate the world with this body. Fang Tien didn't know how to ask you to comfort himself, so he just said, "You stay here, the passage is full of lava now, no one should be able to come here, I will go out first and kill these terrorists so that you will not be beaten after you go out. Get the black gun." As soon as he finished speaking, he flew up and flew out along the magma channel. Tony was left alone, hesitant to speak behind him. Fang Tien had no intention of letting the group of terrorists he forcibly subdued survive. Only the dead can keep secrets better. He didn't want the news that he was the kidnapper to be revealed. He also wants to enjoy the wonderful life of a rich man in the United States. Although he is not afraid of being wanted or hunted by anyone, being Iron Man's savior is always much better than being a terrorist. From the beginning to the end of the whole thing, he didn't show his face at all, but just in case, let these people die. Some of the terrorists outside were shot to death by Fang Tien's laser beam. There were also some who reacted slowly and were submerged by the magma, and some who were unlucky enough to be blown up by missiles, leaving only 20 or 30 who fled in all directions. Ever since they saw a red light piercing the mountain that was dozens of meters thick, these people knew that they were definitely no match for the man in the cave. In addition, the demon who gathered them here happened to be missing. If he didn't escape now, when would he wait? Unfortunately, in front of Fang Tien, all their actions were in vain. The place Fang Tien specially selected was originally a wilderness and inaccessible to people. Coupled with the fact that his space sensor is open, all the situations in a radius of more than 1,000 meters are vividly visible. How could anyone escape his search? Fang Tien was flying in the air, passing by without landing at all. Those who fled had been sucked into a black hole that appeared out of thin air, and they blinked without making any sound. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.